trustees come out with a report. And they report on a bunch of different things. But the staple of this report, and they do 3 levels of projections: a conservative, a moderate, and a sort of a loosey-goosey. Every time you hear about the Social Security trustee report, it is always the most conservative estimate, which means that they are assuming things are going to be the worst for the sake of the Social Security Trust Fund. Back in 1981, Ronald Reagan and Alan Greenspan, they said, we've got a problem with Social Security. Well, other people do. That we've got a problem with Social Security. The boomer generation is so big that the money that is generated by people working and basically paying for the retirement of older people is not going to be sufficient. We're going to raise the Social Security tax, payroll tax, and we're going to fund a trust fund. I don't know, it's just going to give us a little padding. And the trust fund, the solvency of the trust fund ebbs and flows because the economy ebbs and flows. The more people who are employed, the more we generate Social Security tax. The fewer people who are employed, the less we generate Social Security tax. That's one feature. The other feature is the more people who make money that are subject, or actually not people, the amount of dollars, right? There's always at any given time a number of dollars that are within our economy. The more of that money that is subject to the Social Security tax, the more our revenues go up. So in other words, if I have 10 people, and right now the Social Security tax cap, where it stops collecting taxes at $120,000. Let's just call it $100,000 so that I don't have to do math here. If I have 10 people and they're all making $100,000, then we're going to get, let's just call the Social Security tax 10%. It's actually 16%, or it's a little bit more. I mean, you get on both sides, 12%, but let's just call it 10%. $100,000 made by 10 people, $1 million, 10% of that's going to be $100,000. $100,000 are going to go into Social Security system. If you have 4 people making $100,000, or I should say you have 2 people making $100,000, and you've got 7 people making $20,000, right? So now we're at $340,000, and 1 person making the rest of the money. So 240, like $760,000. Only their first $100,000 is subject to the tax. So all you're going to capture is $340,000 worth of taxable income, and you're going to take 10% out of it, you're going to get $34,000 because that last person is making so much of the money that $640,000 of theirs are protected from Social Security tax. That is the situation that we are living in today. Traditionally, Social Security would apply to about 90% of the money made in this country. And now it's closer to like 84%. So the revenue going in there is not as high as it's traditionally been. Social Security Trust Fund, the trustees came out with a report that said because of COVID, a lot less people working, the trust fund is going to run out in 3032, I think it was, 3033.
And they do some version of this periodically.
They do it every year. Every year they make a report.
Right. But like it makes headlines when it's going to be completely depleted by this era.
My point is, it makes headlines when there are those people who want to make it like we have a crisis in this country. We're going to have to cut things. And they're doing it because we're 2 weeks away from this infrastructure bill to start to work on it. But the fact is this: A, if Congress was to do nothing, Social Security is not insolvent. You will get 75% of your benefits. Ad infinitum.
Yeah.
Because people are working, they're paying into the system, It's not into the trust fund. That's a separate thing, essentially, for the sake of this explanation. But to assume that nothing's going to happen is absurd, because Congress can address this. They can address this in any number of ways. They can address it by saying, hey, we're going to adjust the cap so that we get the traditional amount of revenue that we've all, or the traditional amount of revenue is subject to taxes, 91%. They can adjust the cap in a myriad of ways. They can get rid of the cap. So every dollar you make in wages, if you're making over $130,000 a year, is subject to Social Security tax. They could do a donut hole. At one point, that was an idea between 130 and 250. It's nothing but that if you're above 250, you make it. And that's the most sort of like normie way you could address this. And it's super easy to do it. It's super easy to do it. You get rid of the cap.
Another easy way is to raise wages.
1 in 7 children does not have enough food to lead a healthy and active life. But what does it take to end global hunger? It costs 80 cents.
Well, you're still going to be subjected to the same amount. You need to get rid of wealth inequality to get that money. You can raise wages, but you need to raise the cap in some fashion if you're going to do it the normal way. The other way of doing it is Congress can simply just write, like, the U.S. government's going to fund it. We don't need to tax. That's MMT. The bottom line is to say in 11 years, Social Security is insolvent is completely fabrication. To say that in 11 years the trust fund is going to run out is true, but irrelevant. It's no more relevant than to say Congress has not earmarked any money for anything 11 years out from now.
Yeah.
Because they haven't. There's nothing being funded. The Pentagon's not funded. In fact, the only thing that you can count on that will be funded 11 years from now, according to statute, is in fact Social Security and Medicare, because that has a mechanism to self-fund. And I think maybe the CPP actually is because it also comes from fees, banking fees, but you don't know. There's no banks. The bottom line is this is just a scare tactic, and you should be aware of that. And it depends on who you want to convince otherwise. You can tell them, well, we can raise the cap and then we're solving for, until our grandchildren are there. Or you can talk to, rational people and say, like, the U.S. government can deficit spend, without a problem at all.
The Pentagon budget's going to be insolvent by 2033, Sam.
Exactly. Right? What are we going to do? We're going to have no tanks. We're going to have no military personnel.
I don't know why we don't write a version of this up every single year at the same time.
Exactly. Where's the Pentagon trustees?
And you're right, though. It's completely coincidental that this is in the middle of negotiations over a significant infrastructure package where there are a lot of Democrats behind the scenes going,
yes, this is...
And some of the papers are good, like Biden is pushing for Medicare to be able to negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies, which would save billions for Medicare, some good stuff. But this is the other side.
We're getting, this is the start to the little push on us there, and don't believe it. Do not believe it. Part of it's helped by like a slow news day, maybe. But like I saw this on the New York Times last night, and then I woke up this morning, I hear it on the AP, and it's all over CNN, and that's it. And making it like it's some type of big scare. It is not the case. So, let's go to the IMs here. Rampaging Toaster. Hey Sam, wondering if you have any thought about having on author Mike. Yes, okay. Let's look at
Last name
Enrico. Yes,
okay.
Yes. So the clip really got a kick out of me. John, I keep missing the start of the show. What's the starting time now? It's noon. We changed it, I think, 9 years ago. Or I think it was 11:30. I don't remember.
Noon is so much cleaner.
I think it's catching on. Nerd Cheetah, I'm in my classroom now, getting ready for the first day of class with students. There's mold in the wooden cubbies where students keep their stuff, but that's the way it is every spring and beginning of the school year. I've been here. We won't be temperature checking or health screening at all unless their case pops up, which it will. They're already realigning staff at the local small hospital, nursing home, because nurses' aides are catching COVID. Oh, God. My daughter is at St. Lawrence U and will be likely sent home because of contact tracing at the university. It seems like public schools are just charging into this pandemic because all lives really don't matter. The economy does. I'm that happy thought. May the bluebird of happiness take a rainbow colored shit on your windshield of life. Thank you. Yes, I'm in New York, supposedly liberal, supposedly strong union. My colleagues are far too good to be beaten continuously with test scores, and the demands on them go far beyond what should be expected of teachers. Congress can address this is different than Congress will address this. I will tell you something. Congress will address this. Congress will address this. They will definitely address it. There's a reason why they call it the third rail. And you can ask George Bush in privatization, and you can ask Barack Obama, who wanted to cut cost of living increases, and you can ask the Senate caucus, who had passed a resolution to increase Social Security payments. Where can we post our pics for Suns Out, Guns Out Solidarity? I have one work tank shot, and we're wearing Friday. Also, do T-shirts with the sleeves cut out count? I mean, go for it. Pillow Talk. The first half of your daily program is the most enriching and curious, though. Why you don't edit those long interviews or discussions or take out smaller bite-sized videos like you do for the second half of the show? Shorter videos will be shared more, and the insights will reach more people. We do that occasionally, right?
Yeah, I mean, they usually stretch to make it a little bit longer than, say, like the bite size, like 3 to 5 minute clips, but we do take regularly from the interviews pretty much everything.
Also, it's really hard to clip in context a smaller portion of a long interview.
Yes, and I think like the nature of, frankly, the nature, and I say this without certainly not criticizing myself, but I'm also not trumpeting myself. I just think the nature of the way that I do interviews is not conducive to a quick cut of a question. The questions I ask generally are not self-sufficient or discrete. It's just not. I'm not good at doing interviews like that. I don't. Maybe I am, but I don't know. Hey, Swamp Creature, AMR crew, love what you're doing. Listened to your interview a few weeks ago with Milton Alamati. Had a few questions. He said the Tigray people are being attacked on two fronts by the Eritrean and Ethiopian government, and that they are basically the underdogs. However, on the Gray Zone interview from a few days ago, I got a very different picture. The Tigray fighters are actually TPLF, the former government of Ethiopia, for 20 years. They are. He said, Milton Alamati said that. And are apparently very aggressive. They allegedly shot missiles at Eritrea and are pushing south towards the capital of Ethiopia. Any chance you can get a guest on to discuss what's going on? Well, that's consistent with what Alamati said. I don't know what you mean by underdog. If you're implying they're the underdogs insofar as like we should be rooting for them, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I would side with Milton Alamati's way of emphasizing the Gray Zone on this particular topic.
Yeah, I mean, underdog means different things to different people. In this country, we have a very weird thing with underdogs. Like, I don't know if this is the case anymore, but I lived in Australia for almost a year at one point, decades ago. Whereabouts? All over the country I traveled.
Right, that's when you were scrounging for money and selling movie tickets.
Yes, and underdogs in Australia lose. They lose. Like they're the underdog, at least at that time. Like you lose.
Can it be more specific?
Well, in this country, underdogs are only praised when they win. In Australia, underdogs were praised when they lose.
Well, so like the Cubs for a long time would be underdogs.
Yeah, like I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie Gallipoli? Like the futility of things is what actually gets you.
Are you projecting your own financial struggles from your time in Australia?
No. I'm telling you, this is something that I noticed when I was there, because my perception of an underdog was like, if they're not supposed to win and they lose, they're just losers. And in this country, if you're not supposed to win and you lose, you're a loser. If you're not supposed to win and you win, you are like they're the underdog.
Yeah.
Won. And at least in this one other culture at that time, if you were supposed to lose and you lose, you're still like
I just don't.
generated as the underdog.
I don't think your American perception of underdogs true. Like the Cubs is a good example, right? They have a huge, or the Browns as like an underdog. They're still considered the underdog going into their game with the Chiefs, but they're still the underdog after that.
Perspective on the underdog, I
It's like a real underdog is like in the NCAA tournament when the Cinderella story goes far into the
Cinderella story. That's my point. That's my point. Is that like I can't tell if this person is saying they're basically the underdogs, if that is a value neutral term as opposed to just an assessment of their ability. To win this war.
Can you be an underdog after a game? You only, or after a whatever. You have to probably, because of the Cinderella stories, once you win, like does the underdog status cease once the game is played?
I don't know.
Okay, well you were done with defining underdog.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yes.
Noble
That's when
villain.
I tried.
Well, I'm just saying that was just an observation I had, and that's I couldn't assess what this person was saying about.
No, I'm done too.
I'm not saying you should be,
So I'm gonna play that spoon song.
noble villain. I learned yesterday that some more news on video on Afghanistan that the Taliban offered bin Laden to us before we invaded, and GWB said no. I was 11 when this was happening, and it blows my mind how much of our history since 9/11 was built on a giant conspiracy to throw us in the middle east. Left is best. Keep up the great work. Yes, the Taliban said we'll give you bin Laden, but we want to stay in power.
That's the problem with Engel saying like Taliban are 9/11 deniers or whatever, because it creates an impression about what the Taliban thinks about 9/11, like they're going to do another one at us or something.
Well, it's also like, what positive? Well, I guess what you're saying. Who cares?
Yeah.
Well, also, yeah, like, but also like the Taliban itself had very conflicted views about 9/11 and what that meant for them and their sort of domestic situations.
Right.
The idea that they were just they just supported them.
And like, what material difference does it make that they claim if they were to claim that bin Laden didn't commit 9/11?
They do, and yeah, as you say, who gives a shit?
But it doesn't matter.
The Taliban, the worst thing they could be would be 9/11 deniers.
Exactly.
Right?
But they're also climate change.
Right.
I know.
Sam's sexy legs. Thank you. Do you see how Democrats are doing everything to stop India Walton, planning to cover it? They're even considering dumping the mayor's position. Yes, we've touched on that, but we should do more on that. They're already planning for write-in campaign. Of course. Between the 101 and the 5, there's crossover with the criticisms of our media's response to coverage of Afghanistan and the response coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict. The same things apply really. Pro-war sentiment, military-industrial complex influencing politicians, coverage bias towards Israel during conflict, etc. Ford F-150 electric means that it's crossed the point in terms of public sentiment or a company's perception of public sentiment. Elon Musk threw a car into space. Craven Moore. Bravo, Sam, for playing that clip of those of us whose parents gave unique names. Most of the times we're shunned, ignored like Emma last week's declaration, no sexual innuendos week. She didn't read one of my IMs. I am hurt.
I did
Bravo.
not.
Sam, for playing that. Okay, there we go. Militant apathy. Engel has made a lot of money and gained a lot of prestige playing Indiana Jones over the last 20 years. The thing is, he could always stay in the best hotels, have an armed motorcade take him to the airport, go out in the countryside every once in a while and take a few dramatic video clips while a platoon of Marines are on the line, and then he could leave. Poof. Just like that, he's back in his $1 million home in D.C. or New York. Meanwhile, some E3 has to stay and miss years of their kids' lives, watch their marriages fall apart due to multiple deployments, or worse, they lose limbs, their minds due to TBIs, or their lives over there. I deal with these vets every day. That's why posers like Engel make me effing sick. Robo Gorka. Tides go in and out. You can't always explain that, but also menstrual cycles are in exact congress with the moon. I love hearing Sam tiptoe around his NDA. Emma, before majority report, I really want to know how Supreme Court impacted our generation. Can you share 2 to 3 decisions from the last 15 years which have had the most detrimental long-term impact to our society already?
The last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
Citizens United.
Citizens United, and then I would do the gun one in 2008. Gosh, shit, I can't remember the name of it now. Where the right to carry arms was considered a personal right.
Bush v. Gore, that's 21 years
Bush v. Gore was also, I think, probably the worst. I mean, I think you could probably point to a lot of things that made that.
What was the one about the Exxon spill from the late?
The Valdez? I don't remember that. Heller. It was Heller in 2008.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you. There are others, like Janus, in terms of what it did to unions. Concepcion, I think, was really problematic in terms of like barring people from the courthouse.
Yes, Exxon v. Baker Road. Thank you.
I mean, those are just like 4 or 5 that just come off the top of my head immediately.
Bush v. Gore itself is enough for the argument.
Yeah.
The senses, and I think
You said Heller, right?
yes,
Yeah.
and then and people should understand we're about to move into a zone with the Supreme Court where we're going to get decisions that are going to impact the structure of the relationship between our government and the people.
Shelby v. Holder really recently.
Of course, the rollback on the Voting Rights Act, starting in 2013, which I think, what I would argue is getting there in terms of structure, but the ability of our government to do that. The Affordable Care Act case, in terms of,
I mean, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was pretty bad.
the Medicaid, the idea that you cannot compel states, you can't expand Medicaid, was just bizarre. And left hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions and millions of people actually, without health care. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, people should understand, this was in the course of a 5-4 court. 6-3 is so dramatically different, and these crop of conservative justices are so much more, all of them. You know, Scalia was sort of like, but 3 or 4. The heart of this conservative court is far more radical, and you're going to see like a structural difference. Like, remember the word Chevron doctrine, and the delegation doctrine, I think it's called. Those are going to come up soon, and it's going to be very, very problematic for the way our government functions. So. Sam says, Sam's syphilis. I can't quite make it up. I saw a plan over the weekend to flood Texas with a reporting of everyone having abetted an abortion to make it impossible to process all the reports. That's a good idea. Ford's new electric F-150 base model is cheaper than the gas-powered F-150.
The
F-150 should be an electric vehicle. Period. End of story. It is a that is a vehicle that should be electric.
Why?
Because I'm saying today.
I mean, outside of like just why specifically?
Because it's basically for hauling. You can't use it as a plow. You can't like you can haul, but you can't haul like heavy duty stuff like you can with an F-250 or F-350. It is perfect vehicle for electric car.
So if you just want the aesthetic of having a truck, you get an F-150.
I mean, I think that's
Take stuff around.
you take stuff around. I mean, it's convenient to put your your long bows in there, and it's also it's nice. You get a F-150, you carry around like drywall in there, and 4x8 plywood.
Yeah, it doesn't have enough torque for me.
That's right, bingo.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the problem.
I just made fun of that. I don't know what torque means.
Well, I mean, you can't put a plow on it.
Okay. Is torque like best speed?
Steam powder. A friend of mine in high school was a sprinter and regularly stopped getting her period during track season, was assaulted, and then couldn't figure out why she was running so slow. Started getting sick, went to a doctor. She was 5 months pregnant, had no idea. Thankfully, she did not live in a state like Texas. Cat Borosar. But to be clear, again, that problem is it seems to me, is going to become secondary a couple of months out because there's simply not going to be any abortion clinics, period, that are going to be, because part of that bill is once you get charged with abetting an abortion after 6 weeks, shut down. Cat Barasar. Hello from our family cruising up to Trincomalee Channel between Salt Spring and Giuliano Islands near Victoria, BC. Not much wind today, so we're under power, but we hope it will come up afternoon to bring us into Port Browning, where there's some good pizza to be had. All right, appreciate the update. Otters are cool. Sam, you insufferable boomer. I didn't need your Rams horn yesterday. I needed a chauffeur from the hospital. Thanks for nothing. But seriously, love the show. Great job. Used to watch the Dimmy George show regularly. Now I see his vids pop up and cringe at the titles and the thumbnails. Thank you. We should do some more clips. What should we do?
I mean, I'm a bit partial to that clip from the chip. What's his name? Clay Higgins. Yeah.
Is that number 8?
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you're,
Is this the guy who's gone, right? Do we know where?
No,
no,
this
the
is-
Higgins.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
because he was here. But then there's also Glenn Beck talking to Warren Bober, which is pretty good too.
Oh, let's do that one.
I do when Glenn Beck was in the title.
Yeah.
Going for it.
All right, let's do that one.
Oh, it's on the sheet. Oh.
It's not on the sheet. How'd that happen? Here is, this is pretty funny though. I don't know why we're talking about Australia so much today, but here is the ABC in Australia. That's the Australian Broadcasting Company. Sarah Ferguson. She's outside Fox News with Judge Lee. And from Australia, broadcasting the company's new special, Fox and the Big Lie. And she approaches Janine Pirro outside of Fox headquarters. Janine thinks like, oh my gosh, a fan. It doesn't quite work out that way. It's pretty good.
Much easier. Would you mind taking a picture?
What's the outside?
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Oh, now you gotta leave. Questions.
If you are what you say you are, why are you not being cooperative? You're with the press, right? You're a press agency. So we're being cooperative. Why are you being cooperative?
I'm standing here in public place. We don't own the building. We don't own the rights to the imagery.
So mad.
Perhaps it was this moment that finally put paid to my request to interview the current Fox CEO, Lachlan Murdoch.
Yeah, there you go.
You know
Murdoch came from Australia. People might know that, right?
Yeah. Well, why they're so freaked out is because Fox is in like the process of or had like I think a moratorium on talking about those kinds of things because Dominion threatened a significant lawsuit against Fox News. They backed down immediately from it, and then Newsmax and OAN followed once they were threatened with litigation. Janine, even though maybe she wants to speak and opine like that and appeal to those same crazies, she can't say. And she's a former, she's far gone and wine drunk on the rag, but like she understands as a former judge basic like trouble she would be in if she was continuing to go down that road. Now it's just critical race theory.
Right,
and
right. We moved on from that. We've been able to transition
completely
full on.
organically.
Oh, speaking of critical race theory, we're going to talk about this story. Okay. You pull this story up, guys. The Washington Post. So, and you did an interview with Rachel Cohen from the HSF about sort of the attempt to push back on this whole critical race theory. And, you know, this is the media landscape has changed so that this stuff doesn't have the salience that it used to have, but it still is highly, highly problematic. What's interesting is this critical race theory stuff, somebody drew a parallel with the Tea Party thing. This is the way that they're going to try and get their people out to vote in the off-year election.
That's it. Yeah, and that plus these anti-mask things.
And the anti-mask things. And they're not really that distinct of a crowd, it seems.
Well, because they've kind of molded the mask thing into it's all about my children. How dare you indoctrinate my children or suffocate my children or abuse my children?
Absolutely.
As the projection of their own anxiety that's being fed to them by
a lot of these, you know, like the speeches we hear happen at the same venues, right? At school committee meetings.
It's all one and the same.
So, and now I know the people who are worried about the authoritarianism and the free speech are going to be all over this in a big, big way. And I don't want to step on anybody's shoes. I know they're out there and they're going to be really upset about what's going on in Texas in terms of the authoritarianism, about basically deputizing people to uphold the law by suing abortion providers. I'm sure they're going to be crazy about that.
Right, after all those segments they did on BDS.
And yes, and on top of which you're going to see the you know, about the new law that they passed in terms of making it very hard to vote. And then this, I'm sure, back in late July, there was a Texas school board meeting, and a guy got up to talk about the Colleyville Heritage High School principal, a guy named James Whitfield. And the guy who got up, do we have his name? I'm not sure if I don't remember his name, but he got up there and he started complaining that this Whitfield was promoting the conspiracy theory of systemic racism. This conspiracy theory that there is systemic racism in this country, least of all Texas.
What are they conspiring towards?
Well, it's just like you're out of your mind that there's systemic racism. That happened in July. The school board was like, okay, you're not supposed to directly attack anybody. You're charging this black principal with that. Well, a month later, a little bit more, over the past week or two, the district suspended that same principal, a guy named James Whitfield, without explanation. This is according to Whitfield, who told the Washington Post yesterday. The decision followed, according to the Washington Post, several weeks of controversy during which Whitfield tried to publicly clear his name. Students turned out to defend their principal while parents demanded his termination. Now, first off, I don't even know why anybody has to defend their name for teaching about systemic racism.
And I just love the crystallization of the dynamic I talked about earlier. The students I was talking about it on there.
I wonder how much of, I mean,
They put it on one.
not watching this deep into the show. So I just wanted to let everybody know that when you start to see the ads for conservative merchandise, you know what's going on. My least favorite listener. I used to be a big Elon fan, not so much lately. Kind of think he's a joke now. He's a big obstacle to clean energy by selling other companies their carbon credits. Not good stuff. Indeed. Sam's dirty bathwater. I wrote yesterday about the COVID outbreaks in my kids' school in Texas, and the school not allowing kids to miss if they're exposed. Today we got an email telling parents we have a choice to make. The choices are now mask our kids or face a shutdown of campuses due to the expected lack of staff. The email reminds me of Trump's speech urging people to take the vaccine and how they feel they have to coddle these right wingers and ask them so nicely if they don't get their feelings hurt. This district knows shutdowns are imminent, and they know it's spreading out of control. As a matter of public health, I can't fathom why they're risking the lives of the staff and students by leaving this as a choice up to the people who are going to bitch no matter what. But as the letter said, they cannot enforce the mask mandate due to Abbott's dumbass order. My understanding is that Abbott's order has been enjoined. I'm not sure about that. I know in New York State, Hochul stepped back and on vaccines and said that there's not a vaccine mandate in schools anymore. That now it's like you have a testing regime or this and that, but there is a mask mandate. The only thing that and it doesn't apply really in this case, but I heard a radio interview with a county supervisor who was like, we haven't issued a mask mandate in the county, but we've done a strong suggestion about indoor mask wear. And he was asked why, and he can't really answer. Because the real answer is this. You need to choose what's going to get the most uptake of mask usage. And because this country is so effing effed up, and there is just a mass psychosis in this country, fed by all the usual suspects. You don't know as a public health policy measure if you're going to get more mask usage for a strong suggestion or a mandate. At this point, that's a question you have to ask depending on the locality, right? Like in New York City, I think if you put a mask mandate, people are like, okay. Because the vast majority of people are like, all right, we get it. There's data that suggests this, that. But there's a lot of places, because there's such lunatics in this country, that you put in a mask mandate, they don't wear a mask because of the mandate. And it becomes like, and so I sympathize with that. In Texas, I don't know if that's the case. The school board, I don't know if that's the case. But that's it. It's basically like, because you can't start having cops come in or whomever, and but at one point you got to cycle through the suggestion to see if that gives you the kind of uptake, the use of masks, that you want. And then after that, maybe it's like, strong suggestion is supposedly there to give people who are like working in a store the ability to make it a policy, let's say. Things are effed up. It's just insane. Misfit Black Girl. Normally the fact that I'm infertile causes me emotional distress, but Kaleidoscopes is finding myself thanking my lucky stars. These people are monsters. I'm not an accelerationist, but things like this Texas law make me feel like we're in the apocalyptic or accelerationist timeline, whether we like it or not. Any tips for avoiding doomerism? I don't feel like my rant just before this helped. Now, I don't know. I mean, if you want me to reach, I'll reach. I really believe that the Democrats, for the midterms, they need to put Donald Trump forward. They need to lead into Donald Trump and Trumpism, and they need to do other things too. But I don't think you're going to get a situation where there's only so much they can do at this point. I'm talking from electoral standpoint because Sinema and Manchin are what they are, and I would like to see Biden get in there and get rid of the filibuster at the very least and vote. But I don't know if there's a material package beyond the infrastructure bill. That's huge. This is going to be the biggest material benefit if it passes. and I'm talking about the reconciliation. The biggest material benefit that Americans have seen in a decade, at least, you could argue that Medicare and Medicaid expansion was bigger in some respects, but I don't think so. This is going to be huge. I don't know that it's going to be sufficient to drive out voters in the midterms. People vote, sadly, on partisan. What do they call it? Like a polarized and anti-partisan sentiment. And the more that Donald Trump is associated with these Republicans, the more you're going to drive people out. You also may see the suburban women who came out in 2018 in a big way might be hopefully motivated by this as well. We'll see. So that's the morning news. Aaron is not cool. In terms of Elon, I'm a little worried that every loss he takes won't matter. He gets big again one more time. I was watching Toronto's 4-part series on James O'Keefe, and the amount of embarrassment and penalties didn't matter because of how quickly and immediately it was washed away as soon as it hit once. Musk fanboys, investors will line up because he sold them an idea, not a product, but they can now and give him money. Sam is not going to get that down in the trade records. What Dr. Trevor?
It was earlier. Yeah.
All right, 4 more and we're out here. What hot American seating? Hey Sam, didn't expect such a softball and critical interview of that Musk guy. Tesla is a big company used to prop up billionaires' net worth. Teslas are also extremely dangerous. When batteries explode, firefighters can't put them out. When wheel wells explode, causing crashes. Don't even get me started on the AI driving nonsense. I really hope you can bring someone on soon who's dug into the history of what frauds Musk and Tesla are, like this best poggers, etc. Yeah, I appreciate that. Pidlet reads a quack jack. You all need to listen to True Anon series called The Lamest Show on Earth. Seriously eye-opening on how fraudulent Tesla and Elon are tax. Another advantage Tesla has over other car manufacturers is their supercharging network, which has not been available to other electric vehicles until they start selling adapters sometime this year. So even though they are competitive vehicles on the market, they don't have access to all the same chargers across the country. And the final I am of the day, Jay Chabot. You can put a plow on a Chevy 1500 and they market a plow package where the truck has more powerful alternator, heavier suspension, and undercarriage baffle. I push a 7-foot 4-inch plow, blade with mine, and I have a very steep driveway. Can't have a back seat or a long bed. It's the turning radius issue with a plow mount. If I were a commercial plow guy, I'd probably get a diesel 2500, 4-wheel drive wheels in the back. Now I've tried to use a $10 plow and I burned out the transmission in a few years. I'm just plowing my own driveway. Great. Final I am of the day. Matt, Bradley, Emma, great job. See you guys tomorrow. To get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't ready when I just got caught. Searching for the light bar, finding out feeling better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the bed's not gonna hit. And my heart
to those of you who have no idea what this is about, all right, you're going to have to be patient for just a hot second because we're burying the lead here somewhat. Shu has gotten into trouble again, and somehow, as always, this is blown back on me. I never expected my association with Shu on Head to be something that, like, I optically would have to take into consideration, you know? Like, given my reputation, I expected that she would always be the one apologizing for this or for that, and to an extent, she certainly has, but in this case, you know, the shoe was on the other head, as one says, okay? So, the drama essentially is this, okay? Shu got brought on as the social media co-director for a right-wing populist organization in New York. And then there was some backlash, and like 20 seconds later, she left that organization. And people are mad. And they have a right to be mad. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because I feel like one of the most long-standing criticisms that I've gotten with regards to Shu on Head is not answering the Shu question. So that's what we're going to be doing today, okay? We're going to answer the Shu on Head question, all right? Now, as far as denunciations go, there are always going to be people to whom this is completely inadequate because nothing short of denouncing her and, like, burning her fields and salting her land is a sufficient, you know, like, response to something bad she's done. So for those people, I can't do anything. But let's talk about Shu on Head and her problems. So, some very basic background, and then we'll get to the question, okay? So for those of you who don't know, Shu on Head was a skeptic YouTuber, okay? And she's been on the platform for quite a bit longer than I have, and she was quite popular back in the day and remains popular today. And her content back in, say, 2016 was very similar to a lot of other content at the time in that it was anti-SJW, which means that in the most immediate sense, it was the criticism of the sillier elements of the left, when in practice it ended up being kind of a broad enunciation of left-leaning ideals. Kind of the same way in which, like, if you make a cringe compilation about, like, feminist activists, even if all you do is mock the silly elements of the feminist activists, you're still kind of denouncing feminism implicitly through association. You know what I mean? Like, if the only content that you make is finding, like, the cringe lefties, even if you just make one of the cringe, the implicit attack is against the broader left because the audience forms a perception of the left that is skewed by the misrepresentation of their positions. You know, there's an implied generalization. And that was really, really common in the skeptic community. Now, to be perfectly clear, okay, Shu on Head's content was not as bad as a lot of other people's was during that time, you know? I don't think that's whitewashing. It really wasn't. I mean, there's a pretty big difference between, like, the type of content Shu was doing at the time and the type of content that Sargon was doing and then continued to do and then make worse. You know what I mean? Holy chat, you're going to have to calm down for this one, okay? We're getting to everything. You're going to need to calm down, okay? All the shoot arrangements and their types, I understand it. This is literally for you, but you have to take a second, okay? Just, okay. So, her content was, by any standard we hold, certainly pretty damn bad. That was categorically different from a lot of the other skeptics at the time, in that the seeds of her content did not later flower into an overt and objective advocacy for far-right politics. And you can see that in the way their content was back in those days, you know? The difference between Sargon and Shu, I think, is really clear in retrospect. And that's why one of them is whatever the fuck Shu on Head is, and the other one is kind of a neo-Nazi. I feel comfortable saying that because Sargon's, I should just call him Carl, right? Carl is a self-admitted ethno-nationalist who believes there's an international conspiracy of left academics and social justice warriors trying to destroy the white man. And he's talked about, like, Jewish-controlled businesses on Twitter, so I don't know. I don't think he's smart enough to figure the details out. Whatever. Anyway, whatever Shu is, she's not a neo-Nazi, as far as we can tell. So thankfully they didn't go in the same directions, okay? But a lot of people who watched you actually did get pulled over to the alt-right, okay? And the reason for that is because when you are part of a broader community, having shared targets of antagonism can be all it takes for people in your community to make leaps over to more radical far-right perspectives. So, Shu wasn't alt-right, but Shu criticized anti-SJWs in the way that alt-righters, covert or otherwise, did at the time. Meaning that if you see Sargon and Shu and Milo Yiannopoulos all talk about the SJWs, you know, you can move people over to those positions, and you can implicitly endorse people on your side. There's always, you mean SJWs? You said anti-SJWs? SJWs, yes. You can always, just, you know what I mean, Chad. Holy shit, I misspeak all the time. There's unfortunately always be a kind of group thing, you know, behind the way we advocate for positions, and that's really annoying, but it's something that we have to take into consideration. That's why I always advocate for like a really holistic political agenda. You know, you all know what my positions are, and you know what I don't like. I can't. It's not really possible for my content to inadvertently lead you guys to adjacent content that I disagree with, because if I disagree with it, I would have already criticized it. You know, that's why I've thrown shots out at the woke schools and the tankies and the class reductionists and the Nazis and everything. So maybe you can get moved over to those positions, but if so, it's in spite of what I've said, not because of what I've said. At least I try. Whatever her faults, she's always been a little bit ideologically eclectic. She supported Bernie Sanders back in 2016, but not even Carl had evidence of that back then too. And as time moved on, it seemed like most of the skeptic community began to fall apart in a way that wasn't necessarily reflective of Shu's behavior. The skeptic community got more and more overtly, like, you know, right leaning. And Shu, well, she was never pro-Trump in the best of times, but she did make fun of SJWs for being too hyperbolic in criticizing Trump. A mistake that she's since beaten herself up for quite a bit on social media, but still a mistake that she made. But years passed, you know, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and Shu is no longer like a dyed-in-the-wool on the right skeptic community type, you know. And this is when Shu met me. Apparently, Shu was just like browsing lefties to like see what was up, and she came across my channel and she thought it was funny, which true, I am very funny. And she came on one time. That was like early in my channel. I must have had like 20,000 subs at the time. You know? And she came on one time, and well, I didn't know that much about Shu. I knew that she wasn't the same as a lot of the other skeptic types because of some stuff that I heard. For instance, I do know that Shu was, while supportive of trans people, also kind of ending-phobic for a while. But then Shu had a talk with Natalie, with ContraPoints, back in like 2017, and Shu actually changed her position on that. I remembered that, and I thought, okay, that's not like a normal right-wing YouTuber thing to do, to have your mind changed and then delete the thing that you no longer agree with. You know, that's not like a normal thing to do. It's indicative maybe of some other intention or sincerity. So I thought, okay, this isn't like an enemy. I talked with her and she was funny, and since then, to be clear, June has been a close friend of mine because she's always been like super supportive of the channel, and I think she's cool. And obviously, the friendship does bias my perspective somewhat, but that's not going to stop me from tearing into her by the end of this little rant, okay? But she has been really cool, really supportive, and I do appreciate that. Especially given my reputation, like odious optics, you know, having like a larger YouTuber who's like got a broad audience. I mean, it's pretty cool getting that like implicit endorsement that being friends with her, you know, and all the shit. Pretty supportive. All that that aside, all that said, she came on one time, and then a little while after that, people took notice. Hold on. People took notice of the fact that she was coming on my channel, and that I didn't necessarily have an explicitly negative opinion of her, which is what led to this video right here. Yeah, it was 2 hours long. Talking with Sean Head, is she allowed in the lab? Now, I want to be clear right off the bat, okay, that this wasn't my question. I don't really care who's allowed on the left. It's a really odd question. I don't like gatekeeping, remember? That's not a question that I would normally ask. You know what I mean? Like, who's allowed on the left? I don't really get it. For me, it's more about, is this person doing harm or doing good? What should be criticized? What shouldn't be? But this is the question everybody was asking back then. Well, should she be allowed on the left? Well, she's certainly not like Carl, but she's more like this, and she has bad history, and so on and so forth. So, we had a conversation about, like, all the bad stuff that Shu has done. And the two things that I remember, the two things that came to mind with Shu, I think for the most part, were the racism and the Lauren Southern thing, which, in fairness, in case anyone doesn't know, at one point Shu called Leslie Jones a gorilla. So, yeah, that's pretty racist. I'm getting around that. And with Lauren Southern, Shu Head was friends with Lauren Southern well past the point there was any justification whatsoever. Like, Shu Head was a really, really obviously just kind of aligned with a white nationalist, or at the very least, not willing to publicly denounce her, which, Now, my positions on these two things, okay? On the first one, with regards to the Leslie Jones issue, that's obviously horribly racist. I don't see a pattern of, like, anti-black racism in Shu Head. So I don't know if this is, like, a permanent element. Like, there's some deep hidden core of, like, secret racism that she's hiding from the world, so much as it was a really obviously bad thing to do, But people can make their own judgments about that. I do know that the degree to which you can assign charitability to other people's bad behavior is always going to be a subjective thing. Because, to be fair, I've said a lot of really dumb stuff on this channel, and you guys still watch me. How much you like a person really determines the extent to which you're willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. You guys like me, I assume. So you're willing to give me the benefit of the doubt because even if you disagree with some of the stuff that I've seen, because you like me, like, oh, well, he's mostly like this. Whereas if you're not a fan of me, all you see is a clipped together compilation of every stupid thing that I've ever said, in which case that's what you form your opinion from, and you don't really have that charitability. So this is always going to be kind of a subjective thing. I certainly don't see, like, a huge pattern of overt racism in Shu's work necessarily, so that's up to your personal opinion. I'm actually more bothered by the Lauren Southern thing, and I think it really ties into some of the criticism we're going to lay into it a little bit. Shu Head is seemingly really quite intent to not let Lauren Southern's political opinions get in the way of their friendship. I think that was actually more indicative of some of the problems that she was going to be having later, far more so than the Leslie Jones thing. But we'll get into that, in a little bit. This is one of the reasons why people accuse me of, like, whitewashing Shu. And this is, I think, the last thing I'm going to say that comes off as charitable here, okay? I really don't like that accusation, in large part because there's no way to falsify it. If you don't like my assessment of other people's character, it's always like he's whitewashing her, rather than we disagree on the extent to which this reflects poorly on a person's character. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, if you've been fans of me on social media, you know this. How many times have you been accused of just ignoring the bad things that I've done? And you want to say, in response, I don't ignore it, I just take it into consideration and weigh it against the good things that he does. But then they're like, well, you just ignore the bad things. See what I mean? It's not falsifiable. There's not a full equation being taken here. And for the most part, I think Shu's content's okay. If you take a look at her Twitter feed, the videos that she posts these days, at the very least, they're pretty distinctly left-leaning for the most part. They're not like overt alt-right content. And I think that Shu's done pulling in her audience, which has shown that they've moved to the left tremendously over the past few years, which I think is nice. We talked about whether she's allowed on the left, blah blah, and time moves on, and now here we are today. Okay, there have been like 20 stupid things that Shu has done over the past year that I can think of that have somehow blown back to me. Because anytime this happens, I'm the first person who hears about it. Like I'm her fucking dad. Do you think I control what she does? People always say that. Oh, you just listen to watch. If I controlled what she did, do you think she'd keep doing shit that would get me in trouble? What? If I had any control whatsoever on her opinions, do you think like I would be? Yes. Now do this thing that will cause me 2 days of drama. What? Clearly I don't have enough control over her because if I did, I'd be smacking the phone out of her hand anytime she got mad at a liberal on Twitter. No, that's not the issue here. Okay, it's a very very stupid accusation. No, the problem is that where we are right now, Shillinghead keeps getting in hot water, and I think it's reflective of some extremely severe problems with the way she regards politics. Okay, because it's not just this thing, this like social media director that immediately leaving things, other stuff too, like the being anti-immigration thing, or the disregarding the consequences of pulling out of Afghanistan thing, or the attacking liberals thing, or the this, or that, or that. And some of her positions on being anti-kink and pride were, I mean, they were more restrictive than mine, that's for sure. For instance, she was throwing in drag queens with no kink and pride, which I absolutely do not. I think that being a drag queen is just like a fashion aesthetic. It can be a kink thing, because any kind of fashion can be a kink thing if you strip enough of the clothing away. But she was kind of throwing that in there, implying that drag queens are a sex thing, which kind of implies that drag queen story hour is inappropriate around children. And it's like, oh, well, through implication, we've kind of arrived at a right-wing position from some of your beliefs here. And every time she does this, by the way, I call her out, and every time I get the same response, oh, sorry, I'm done, which does become less convincing with time. Normally, there are like 3 responses to this. Whenever Shu does something like this, there are 3 responses. One of them is total indifference, which I think is a response from most of her audience. I don't think her audience cares that much. Her audience, I think, is mostly kind of, lightly engaged with heavy politics. Like they're a little nonplussed. And if they like Shu, they're probably used to Shu's shitposting behavior. There are a lot of people who are in my audience and hers, and I love all of you. I don't know the extent to which this tends to bother you. Again, charitability plays a really, really, really good role in all of this. So maybe you're like less inclined to criticize her because you know her better, whatever. That's one response. The other response, and this is the one that always bothers me, and this is why I get accused of defending her all the time. One of the responses that tends to come up, especially from the left, from you guys, is that Shillinghead is a grifter, that she's secretly right-wing, and this is all good thing. At the risk of coming off like overly charitable, this is an objectively incorrect assessment of Shu's personality. It's not just like mean, it's also like bad analysis of the situation. I can say this, like, I think that it's about as likely that Shu is a secret right-wing grifter as Hunter Avallone is. And anyone who watches my channel knows what a high opinion I have of Hunter Avallone. An impossibly high opinion of this character, okay? Shu is so unfathomably far from a grifter, it's impossible, but unimaginably far, okay? Now you might think, oh, so that means her behavior is okay. No, that's not what it means, okay? Grifting specifically means lying for the benefit of some kind of personal gain, money or attention. Shu does not lie about any of the shit that she does or says, okay? That's not the direction she takes things in. It's just not accurate. And she's not some secret double agent for the right. When I see people on my subreddit go, so this is proof that Shu was a conservative, I think you're getting things off the wrong foot there, because not only is that like kind of dumb analysis, it's also putting other people in a position where they get to defend her. You know what I mean? Because Shu is not a conservative. On most issues, Shu is significantly to the left of the average American, sometimes radically so. She is absolutely not a conservative. That's just not the criticism you make against her. Some people call her alt-right. What are we talking about? Come on. It's just make a better criticism, response that she gets when this type of stuff crops up is the one you guys are making right now, and it's that she's just stupid. And while I think that's certainly more likely than the cryptic response, I also don't know if that's necessarily the most accurate assessment. Because if you actually take a look at the content Shu produces, she's pretty effective at delivering a certain style of political commentary that requires a fair amount of thought, I think, and engagement, you know? To me, I think that's stupid can be a bit of a shorthand. You know how I've said, like, for instance, like, Calcula is stupid? In reality, he's probably not. He puts together content that's pretty effective and well-rationed. He's, at the very least, pretty decent at running an audience together. I mean, Christ, we call like Ben Shapiro stupid. But in reality, it's Ben Shapiro's opinions that are stupid. It's Ben Shapiro's political approach that's stupid. And likewise with Count Dankula and Shu. I don't necessarily know if it's a holistic thing. I think the problems are actually a little bit more sinister than that. You know, I think they actually go a little bit farther than that. The stupid thing, I think, is if there's any criticism that I'll lay at that accusation, it's that it's too nonsense. You know? Shu is very stupid about some things. So let's talk about it, okay?
Acho que ela tem muito aquele síndrome de. Ela está constantemente a estudar para te dizer aquilo que tu queres ouvir para ela ser aceita e gostada por toda a gente.
So here's the issue. This is the thing that happened most recently, okay? Shu on was briefly announced to have joined as a social media co-director of the New York State Populist League, okay? There's nothing inherently wrong with that, or not with the fact that the New York State Populist League is a right-leaning organization advocating for a Republican mayoral candidate. And additionally, they also brought on someone who Sean had claimed not to know. I guess a Nick Fuentes type. Like they brought on two people, Shu and then another guy, and the other guy is like a Nick Fuentes type, America First conservative, like that kind of thing. I mean, he's got the sunglasses, the rainbow shades, and he's got America First in the profile. And I didn't look too deep into things, but it looked pretty bad. The organization as a whole is anti-vax and generally conservative, but you know, populist conservative. Yeah. Now, obviously, that's pretty bad. Shu got some backlash, and Shu left. Let me tell you how this felt from her perspective. Okay, we're gonna. This isn't charitability. Okay, this is more. This is more point of view perspective of a fish before it's eaten by a shark. Let's watch this from Shu's perspective. Okay, Shu went out to that, like I think Medicare for All march. You know, the one that Jimmy Dore was a big fan of. There were a lot of people there who were sincerely Medicare for All. I don't think that's the only one. But she went on out there and she met some people. And one of those people was like, hey, do you want to join our organization? And she went ahead unthinkingly said yes. And putting very little to no thought in it, she just put their name, you know, in her Twitter bio. Yeah, I'm a populist. And they added her. And why wouldn't they, by the way? Why wouldn't a tiny organization like this add one of the largest political YouTubers in a public manner? Seriously, good viewership with that. And then there was, of course, the blowback. She didn't seem to really investigate them that much or engage with what their intentions or interests were. But when I talked with her, she seemed to say, and I still can't believe she said this, she just thought it'd be fun. They're her friends. She thought she could change their minds. Now, it really boggles the mind, truly boggles the mind, how a person could ever believe that joining a right-wing organization would be an effective method of changing the minds of people in that organization. What's funny is that this is kind of like a sick parody of the, by letting trans people into the CIA, we can make it progressive logic, just twist it around the ideological opposite end. It's funny, this is like the idea that like letting people in with given opinions means you can transform like organizational structures. Now, I do want to be clear, by the way, the New York State Populist League isn't like an organization. There's no money, there's no budgets. It's literally just like a volunteer kind of thing. There were people saying she was doing it for the money. There's no money. Okay, they had like 400 Twitter followers. There was nothing else. I could make an organization if I want. You know, like the Washington State Chad League or something, and get a couple hundred followers. If I added people onto that, it would have about the same institutional legitimacy. Okay, so this was not a doing it for clout or for profit thing. This was a Shu doing this because friends asked her to kind of deal. And that reminds me a little bit of the problems that Shu had with both Southern, didn't it? Shu has a tendency to put friendship above politics. Or more accurately, don't let politics get in the way of friendship. Friends do favors for friends, and people talk with people, get along with people, and the political disagreements are just kind of, abstract disagree, just kind of a fun thing, an aesthetic thing. I know that she hangs out with a lot of right-leaning types, and I've talked with her about it. You know what she said? I kind of sympathize with this. Left-leaning types don't talk to her. And I get where she's coming from there, too, I don't really look around for social groups to hang out in because I hate all of you. But I do know for a fact that if I was actually trying to, I would not be, allowed to participate in almost any left-leaning social group, I know that for a fact. I remember back, a year and a half ago, I experimentally joined some of the larger left-leaning Discord servers, and the response to them was just insane. Instantly, the DM people rallying to get the advantage. So before I said anything, but I joined the server, and the little bot would go, "You remember join Rush?" And I just chilled there, and invariably within minutes, the rolling wave would push me out. So if that's Shu's response, if that's what Shu sees from the left, I don't necessarily blame her for hanging out with more ideologically diverse crowds. The problem is she doesn't seem to understand the difference between interpersonal engagement and public platform support. Because this right here is not an interpersonal engagement between friends. This is a right-leaning organization getting the clout belt of being directly publicly associated with a huge online figure. That is not just, I'm looking for friends to hang out with. There's no way of getting around this, Now, I don't think Shu understands how this looks from a broader perspective, especially because Shu is keenly aware that the left is constantly accusing her of being some secret Nazgul advocate. But from everyone else's perspective, Shu doing this, the immediate consequence of this is that fans of Shu are going to look at this right-wing organization and think, oh, Shu endorses this. Oh, I guess this is cool because Shu likes it. And then they're going to move over to that, or at the very least have some of their opinions or perspectives influenced by the positions of that organization. That is the only thing that can come from this. That is the only thing that can come from this. You realize that, right? From the perspective of a public figure who has an audience that affects broader political discourse online, the only thing that really matters is what your behavior does to the people around you. What's the point of being a public figure? What's the influence of a president if not for the effect they have on their citizens, We're all public figures. That's what matters most. So she critically fails to consider that what she liked about joining up with this organization, the whole friends with friends thing, is meaningless in the face of public advocacy. Whereas the thing she didn't think about is the only thing that matters. Whether or not people in her community are going to look at that organization and be positively influenced. Bosh, it's cool you're defending your friend and all. Hey, Mons, you can start banning anyone in chat's complaining. Defending? Shu critically fails to consider the effect that her behavior has on the broader audience. Shu also fails to do this every single time Shu gets in trouble on Twitter for saying anything right-leaning or anything dumb. And this happens pretty frequently. where she won't go anytime she's even remotely criticized by like a liberal, on something or another. Anytime she's accused of not being black enough, she will freak out and quote them and block everyone who disagrees with her, go on this whole thing where she gets run down an increasingly anti-intellectual cycle all the way to the end belt. Okay. Recently, Big Joel did a video on this. Big Joel did a video on Shoehead's anti-intellectualism, and I thought it was a really, really great video. Shoehead has a really bad tendency of holding a position almost dogmatically, and then when anyone criticizes her, she reframes the discourse in such a way as to invalidate the other person's perspective, which effectively makes it impossible to criticize her in a way that she accepts. It seems like criticizing Shoehead has one of two outcomes. Either she says, oh my God, you're right, I'm so stupid, and then does it again in a week, or she blocks you. Those seem to be the only two Shoehead responses to criticism. It feels like I'm the only person who criticize her consistently because I'm posting a freckle list. I can't get away with it without getting blocked. And every time this happens, I give her shit, That's the reason why this video isn't being done in some cringe addressed to Shoehead, like in some second person format. Because after all this happened, every time anything like this happens, I give her shit for it. But I guess we're going over the Shoehead question now, which I think we should probably get to. The Shoehead question is, what the fuck is wrong with her? And the Shoehead answer is, it's a combination of a number of problems with her character and the way she addresses politics. And I can boil it down to three basic points, okay? I think those three basic points are friendship politics, gamification, and anti-intellectualism. Now, I can't address the anti-intellectualism any better than the Big Joel video, which I strongly suggest you won't watch. This is a problem she continually runs up against. And it's a problem that infests a lot of her thinking. It overlaps with the gamification thing as well, but guys, I don't really think Shoehead reads past the article header sometimes. I don't think that I don't know if Shoehead's ever read a study. Maybe she has. I know that she can read them because I've talked with her and stuff. In private, I know she's capable of it. She doesn't lack the ability to do so. I don't know. I don't know if she ever has, though. I don't know if she wants to. It comes down to me, I think, disinterest in political arguments outside the extent to which they can be turned into a joke. It seems like Shoehead is unable to engage with the subject beyond the extent to which you can make memes about that subject. The degree of nuance she develops on a given political topic, she doesn't seem to have an interest in extending it beyond a point where she can shitpost about it, if that makes any sense. And it seems like oftentimes her political positions will actually get truncated to fit within the confines of a meme. I think one of the best examples for this would be with the Afghanistan discourse. Okay, now I have talked with Shu privately, and pardon me for revealing logs here, but Shu's position on Afghanistan is basically identical to mine. That it is a tragedy what's happening in Afghanistan. However, the reason we're withdrawing is because it seems like the nation building project wasn't working and we will be there literally indefinitely. Our presence acting as a radicalizing agent for the Taliban and therefore keeping the country in a permanent stasis field where nothing actually gets solved. I've talked to her, that's her position. As far as I understand it, that is my position and her position. We have the same position. I'm sure I know more about it than she does because we do different types of content, but fundamentally, here's the problem. Is that what it looks like when she tweets about Afghanistan? No. She was making fun of people for pointing out that there would be consequences to the withdrawal. She was saying, don't care, we need to take care of our own, bring the boys home. Sounding like a fucking Republican isolationist, all of her positions got whittled down to the lowest IQ, most memified versions of themselves until they scarcely resemble the position I think she actually does hold. yeah, it turns into like Kyle Kalinske tier stuff. I know her positions are better than that, but when expressing them, it gets reduced down to the lowest common denominator. So why? Why does she do that? If she knows a position and then takes a worse one, why? Well, I think one part of this, I think, is she legitimately does prioritize shit posting as the medium by which she expresses political opinions. And the simpler a position is, the easier it is to get people behind hard lines where they agree or disagree with. And that always makes for, in addition to better comedy, better political discourse. Less nuance means more division, means et cetera, et cetera. And that's good for engagement. Now, I don't think she does it for the engagement. I think that's how her brain is coded now because she's been shitposting for so long. I don't think she deliberately thinks, let me whittle down this position because doing so will bolster my profile or whatever. I think this is the medium through which she expresses herself. Unfortunately, her thoughts have been constrained by that format. I legitimately think sometimes she should probably take a break from Twitter for no other reason than because I think it is actually destroying her ability to understand the totality of the position that she actually believes in. It's like irony posting, but somehow a bit worse. And there is a level of irony posting to it as well, too. She does this Pepe posting shit all the time where she won't own up to a position unless she's really pushed on it. I called her out on this when she talked on Travel, I remember. Remember when they were talking about whether or not it was unethical to make memes about guillotining the rich, and towards the end when she was losing that debate, she was like, well, is it so bad to guillotine? No, like, indistinguishable from the way alt writers talk, the way that they'll obviously adopt a position, but then like run away from it, but then like kind of jokingly adopt it. The irony posting stuff really bothers me unless it's clearly being done in a self-aware manner. You know, here's a manner in which I think is justifiable. Okay, I think that every element of political control is manifested through political violence. Okay, the police, that's political violence. Military is political violence. Choosing how much of your tax dollars are distributed to medical care and infrastructure as opposed to the military, that is a component of political violence. So when people ask me if I'm in favor of political violence, it's kind of a joke to me because I don't think there's anything outside of that. You know, I don't think there's a fundamental difference between the kind of political violence people vote on and the kind people don't vote on. All you're really doing there is moralizing illegality, and to me that's a really silly way of analyzing politics. So when I say stuff like, no, I'm against political violence, I'm joking, and I hope you all know I'm joking. You all should know my position on this. I usually just do that because I don't want people like trying to clip chip me, you know. But you all know my position, and I stand by the position that I've just expressed to you. Whatever I say. But sometimes she wants it. It seems like she legitimately either doesn't know what her position is and tests it through irony, or she ends up abandoning it and then later defending it in a pseudo-joking way, and that's not great. If anything, it suggests a fundamental inability to responsibly engage with the political narrative, which I'll get to in a second. So, with that all put out there, you know, I also have the politics of friendship, which is something that Schumann has a serious problem with, okay? A serious problem with. Now, this is most obviously indicated in the thing where, like, she is an incredibly odious friend, and she's not willing to publicly denounce because friendship should supersede political differences, and it seems like, and there's no way of getting past this. Shu, when you do stuff like that, what's the difference between that and Ellen going to a baseball game with George W. Bush, right? Like, you realize that, right? Like, you screech on Twitter about war criminals being legitimized through liberal bootlickers, and then you're like, oh, well, you know, they're just like my Maslow Huey Long friends, whatever. Like, this is literally the same thing. The only difference is you think that Nazgul Huey Long types are cool, and you don't think that neophones are cool. You realize that, right? This is entirely an aesthetic preference on your part. It has nothing to do with the principle of the matter. And it's really, really stupid. If you want to have friends who are right-leaning, that's fine. I don't give a fuck who you're friends with. But there's a big difference between who you're friends with and who you implicitly publicly support. And the reason why everyone accuses you of being a Nazgul is because you've done a very bad job keeping your friend interests and your political advocacy separate. If you've done a good job with that, nobody would be calling you a Nazgul, you know? Like, the reason this reputation justification is developed is specifically because there is not a distinction being developed, and if you notice your fan base does too. And there are people in your fan base who are not supposed to. And it's difficult to look past that when you're joining populist right organizations, you know? It's like this kind of stuff. This is not like just friendship. You're a huge platform. And you don't want to use it responsibly. And the reason you don't want to use it responsibly, talking to her again, I should be talking to her. The reason she doesn't want to use it responsibly is because she doesn't think of herself as a political commentator. Let me ask you guys something. This is for the voters in the audience. Do you remember the days, maybe a decade ago, or a little further back, when it was possible for a large public figure to not be on the left, but to still be liked by the left, because every once in a while they would deliver like left-leaning opinions. You know what I mean? Like they weren't on the left, they were like in the center leaning, you know, and like comedians and stuff. Like there were a lot of comedians who were like this. They weren't like on the left, but there was a general attitude. Like every once in a while they would deliver an opinion, and people on the left would celebrate it because it was in line with their thing. We don't live in this world anymore. Everyone has chosen a side. 2016 was the end of that world. There is no longer any like this person dances in the center and occasionally drops little like sprinkles of political advocacy on either side. There are people on the left and there are people on the right, and there are people who sometimes play the center like Joe Rogan. But Joe Rogan isn't even liked that much by the left for a lot of reasons. One of which, at least, we're going to be getting to by the end of this stream. Because I don't hold in high regard people who are equally amicable to far right ideas as they are to simple, obvious, basic left-leaning ideas. You know what I mean? I don't know how many accolades should be given. Like, oh, you know, Joe Rogan has a ton of right-leaning people on there who legitimize their ideas, but he also isn't a climate change denier. Congratulations. That's very good of you, Joe Rogan. You're doing very good, Joe Rogan. Very, very in the center, very balanced. The thing is, we don't really have these like center-leaning figures anymore. And when I think of that type of person, I think of like comedians for the most part, you know, because comedians for the longest time had the ability to dance on the margins, but now they don't. The most known comedians are pretty obviously pushed to one end or another, okay? Like, very, very clearly. You have comedians like Bo Burnham, and we know where he stands. Then we have that god-awful ventriloquist guy, and we know where he stands. And for the most part, if you cover any political content, your ability to align with the political bloc is determined mostly by how you feel about Donald Trump, because that's like the lightning rod, right? Bill Burr has his moments. Bill Burr's a wacky guy. Maybe Bill Burr is an example of this. Maybe what I'm talking about isn't gone. Maybe it's just a dying breed. The point that I'm trying to get to is that Sean Head wants to be that. Okay? Sean Head is not interested in being an ideologically consistent partisan bloc for a given set of positions. Sean Head wants to be a dancing with a lot of friends on all sides of the aisle who drops her perspectives and gets along with everyone. You know? I think more than anything else, Sean Head doesn't want to let the expectations and boundaries of political advocacy constrain her. And to an extent, I sympathize with that because I am way more willing to reach out to the right than a lot of other people on the left. You know, I do sympathize with that for a while. You know, or like to an extent. And a lot of people do accuse me for not really being a fan of gatekeeping, of doing this as well to the left, that I let people on the right in, or they think that it's bad of me to like speak in a friendly tone with. I don't speak in a friendly tone with a lot of people on the right, but I also talk to Chris Reagan. Hell, even the amazing atheist I've gotten criticism for talking to, which is wild because despite his checkered path, the dude is basically like an ant now. He's probably farther to the left than I am. There are a lot of people on the left who really don't like the idea of people breaking ContraPoints got photographed with other people on the schedule. She wanted it. That was the meaning for it. ContraPoints convinced Shuanhead that non-binary identities are valid. But ContraPoints got in a lot of trouble for that photo, being accused of some kind of tea sipping, brunch attending, liberal both sides of it, Now I think stuff like that is really, really dumb. I don't believe in this sort of reality type. That's why it frustrates me so much when I see dumbasses on the left who are like, did you see that photo of Bosch where he's palling around with Charlie Kirkington pool? Bitch, what do you think I went to the studio to do? Make friends? No. I went there to deliver left arguments to an audience of millions of people. Okay? I didn't go there so I could after the show was done, you'd be like, that was fun. But in reality, I talk about, by the way, we talk about the politics when the cameras are off too. You know that, right? When the cameras go off, it's not like we go back to brunch. We start, the discourse continues. It happened both times. I went to two cool studios. The political disagreements continue past them because we disagree on everything. But they think that we're just collaborating and that, that anything less than us being fucking feral IRL. When I go to Politicon for the first time, you people are going to see so much cancellation on social media because I'm going to go there and I'm going to see people who I don't agree with and I'm going to be courteous with them. Photos are going to be taken, and there is nothing I love more, by the way, than confidence in mob conservatives, okay? I'm going to find every conservative I can find, put an arm around them, and keep the biggest fucking grin for the photo, okay? Nothing makes me happier than holding a frame next to people like that, okay? Now people are going to see those photos and they're going to think, oh my God, Bosch is collaborating with the enemy. No, I'm not. I'm flexing in front of the enemy, all right? Let me have fun. I'm saying that I'm sympathetic to this behavior for sure. The problem is that my willingness to tiptoe across the line from time to time is informed by a pretty comprehensive understanding, at least I try to have a comprehensive understanding, of the effect this behavior has on my audience. Or, to put it more succinctly, exactly 0 people in my audience were moved over to the right because I took a photo with Charlie Kirkington. How many people in Shew's audience do you think are going to be more amicable to these political positions foreseen for association? That's the difference. I know what my audience does. I know what my audience is aware of, what they're interested in. And I know how to control my audience, at least with regards to giving favorable or negative opinions to different people or ideas. That's just a basic part of political messaging. That is just, that's like 101 for public figures. How is your audience going to react to this? That's literally the first thing you learn. I learned this within a few months of starting my channel. I wasn't the best at it at first, but I got better with time. You've been doing this for far longer than me. And I know that I'm politically partisan, and Shuanhead isn't politically partisan in the way that I am. I think of myself as an advocate for the left, okay? Shu thinks of herself as an advocate for what she believes in. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I'm not saying everyone has to fall in line, but at the very least, there are some skills and basic types of understanding that go along with being a political advocate that she can't keep not understanding. I don't think it's that she doesn't know it. I think she's just trained herself to not see it. Shuanhead, every time she does anything in public, thinks of herself as some and I'm inferring here, as some do or dare comedian. I really do believe that, a generally left-leaning person in front of a microphone whose first goal is irreverence beyond anything else, irreverence and freedom. So she can make her jokes, but if someone in the audience heckles her for not being left enough, then what does a comedian do? Does a comedian stop the show and apologize? Of course not. A comedian's job is to make people laugh. So the first response Shuanhead has to any kind of criticism along these lines is to reflexively attack it in a way that maximizes the likelihood of her feral audience being driven against whatever left-leaning criticism is being made against them, because that keeps the show going. Introspection is disallowed unless it can be done in a funny way, which is why Shuanhead's introspection always looks like her saying, "Lamau, I'm so dumb," or when she posts those memes of the Giga Chad, where it's it's Chad to respond with anecdotes, or it's a Chad room to not read the article beyond the title. And the thing is, shoot, those are only funny when I post them because they're jokes with me. But with you, you're actually bragging about anti-intellectualism. And there's a very different vibe when you're like, you can't co-opt that, you know what I mean? Like, for instance, here's a funny meme, okay? It's the Giga Chat, and he's off in the cosmos, you know, like he's a god, okay? And the title says, I poop in my hand, and the bottom says, and then put it in the toilet, or something, I don't know. When I poop in my hand, and then drop it in the toilet manually, or something like that. Now, delightful meme, 9.5 out of 10. It's not funny if you actually do that, though. Or, I should be clear, it's funny once, but then if you keep doing it, it just becomes like a worrying coping mechanism, okay? Maybe it actually does stay funny. It's a little bit funny. You can't keep making those jokes. You actually do that shit, Chew. You actually engage in that behavior. And I know what you're going to say when you see all of this, and you might actually watch this now. It's like, oh my god, you're right, I'm so sorry. But like, you always do that. You need to take a goddamn second, okay? And for God's sake, okay, you need to take a second and think for a second, okay? We live in scary times. You understand that, all right? I've talked to you in private enough to know that you are fully aware of the severity of the situation that we find ourselves in, okay? I know you know that climate change is a serious threat, okay? I know you know that QAnon and anti-abortion protests and this and that and what have you are serious threats. I know you don't actually trivialize these things, but the aesthetic of nonchalant trivialization is something you've adopted so consistently in your platforms that it feels like you're beginning to buy into your own aesthetic. And then what you have? You have like this rolling habit of unifying every problem, of blowing over every element or opportunity for introspection, of saying, oh, sorry, and then doing it again, of making friends with people with at best dubious political positions, and then not understanding the difference between private and public association. How long is that going to keep going on? And I know what's happening right now, too. And this is the problem with what's happening right here and right now, okay? The problem with what's happening is that stuff like this pushes people to the right. So I feel like I'm almost held hostage by the inherent hostility of the left and the inherent willingness to abide of the right. Because anytime Shoe on Head posts something left-leaning, you know what happens? You know what happens, Chad? Anytime Shoe on Head posts something left-leaning, the broader right stays quiet because they're waiting. And the broader left doesn't care because it's Shoe on Head. But anytime Shoe on Head posts something right-leaning, the right just pours accolades on her. Base and red pill, this is so good, this is so cool, amazing. And the left loses its shit. So if Shoe on Head is getting constantly love bombed by the right and hate bombed by the left, I feel like I'm pulling against an inexorable tide that's always going to be Shoe in right-wing social circles, and therefore to be influenced by right-leaning people. Now, of course, in reality, the right is every bit as hostile to political disagreement as the left is, but the right wants Shoe back. That's the big difference. Why do you think the moment Destiny started going anti-left, all the people on the right started sucking his cock? Sargon came on to suck his cock. Ian Miles, Chuck, Paul Joseph Watson, they all started looking in favorably because they want one more person to add on to the belt. You know, the right is much better at taking advantage of and exploiting ideological dissonance than the left. Left is. When people on the right break rank, the left doesn't swell out in support for it. When did the left swell up in support for fucking Hunter Avallone? Hunter Avallone was a massive right-leaning YouTuber who not only did he go left, he went to a right-leaning conference and publicly said that the people on the right were full of shit for saying YouTube was discriminating against them. And where was the big left outsurge of support for Hunter? Nowhere. Zero. None. Nada. It didn't happen. The people on the left who moved to him were from my community and from Destiny's. And credit where credit's due, that's a good thing. But it should have been way the hell more. Why was it only us? It's because the left doesn't give a fuck about reforming people to the left. The left doesn't keep guards. The left does not make an effort to have ex-conservatives over, but there is nothing the right loves more than ex-liberals or ex-leftists being brought over. They get Brendan Hill videos for their shit. Carolyn Borisenko is a uniformly unimpressive woman. She's unremarkable in every imaginable sense, but she got a PragerU video because she was in an inner community and noticed people were mean to Trump. Every time this happens, they always get brought over idols. Well, like Blammo, here's your own daytime television show. The right is always going to tug on you that harder than the left will. And unfortunately, that is sometimes as much of a problem as Schuon has behavior. Because as long as the left is impossible when it comes to moving people over to it, you're going to have problems with people wavering on the margins, which is really, really shitty, you know? Now, none of this is meant to absolve Schuon out of any of her behavior. She's an adult woman. She's older than I am. And all of this stuff that she's continuing to struggle with right now is stuff that I accepted as a part of the job very early into the okay? None of this has anything to do with absolving her or downplaying her ignorance on these issues. And this aesthetic she constantly cultivates of being this above it all, you know, make friends with everyone, you know, do or dare, not to commit to anything, always willing to, you know, sit down and be friends with sort of both sides of it. That she really, really, really hates what liberals do as conservative, but likes when she doesn't to like Nazis. I just don't get it. I'm sorry. I don't get it. She needs to move over on all of that. Maybe it would be easier for her to move over on this if the left was willing to celebrate the good things that she does and says, and that would mean that criticisms are a little bit more salient. Remember, criticisms only mean something insofar as they are contextualized by positive affirmation. If all a community does is criticize you, then it all just sort of meets together and becomes you know, like for instance, tankies. Have there ever been tankies who have made salient criticisms of me? I'm sure it's happened at some point, and I don't fucking care. Those people are insane. Maybe at some point, somewhere, in some form, a fascist has made a good point about me. I'm sure that statistically, somewhere, maybe they're like, oh, Bosch got this point wrong. Also, I hate Jewish people. Like, okay, maybe you got one on me. I'm not going to pay attention to your community hard enough to try to figure out which information is worth listening to and which isn't. I have to listen to communities that I feel have a balanced and proportional understanding of what I do and the ways in which I do it and how that content can be improved. And as long as the left can't do it, you're paying attention, right? As long as the left can't do that for Shu is going to struggle accepting criticism from the left. Again, this is not absolving her of her behavior, but it is something worth taking into consideration. Anyway, that is the Shu on head question, as I understand it. Why is Shu on head the way she is? Why does she act this way? Well, in my opinion, it's because she aestheticizes anti-intellectualism to the point that it destroys her ability to form nuanced points. She gamifies political engagement to the point that her advocacy for positions always gets boiled down to what makes the best shitposting joke, more so than what actually best addresses the problem at hand or what best advocates for the position she holds. And her friendship politics means that she will always prioritize the ability to make friends with people on all sides, with forming hardline ideological barriers, and that because she can't distinguish between private friendships and public engagement, she's going to consider using that actors. Those are the three problems. Now, I don't think those three things make Schuonhead stupid. In fact, if anything, I think calling Schuonhead stupid kind of obfuscates the issues that I just talked about. I know stupid people, and they're not all as harmful as Schuonhead has been. You see? Specificity is important. So maybe she's stupid with regards to those issues. Maybe she doesn't take it seriously enough. Maybe political commentary just isn't cut out for her. I don't want to believe that for a couple of reasons. First of all, because I do in spite of all of this, legitimately believe that Shoehead is overall an asset to the left. I do believe that. In spite of all the problems, if you were to take the ultimate abacus of debate and figure out where generally she's having the most effect, I do believe that overall it is one which is favorable to the left. Pretty significantly for that matter. If you want to, you can go to Shoehead's channel or off-channel Brainlet, and you can watch her videos. And these are not like crypto alt-right videos. For the most part, they're anti-capitalist videos. But she touches on social progressivism pretty often. And yeah, Brainlet has always been out. And in fact, I think she posts way more content there these days. But it says she has 4 videos, and she will delete all of her Brainlet videos. And she will delete everything on Brainlet. Actually, she privately alleged it. Anyway, I browsed plenty of Brainlet content back when there was Brainlet content. And I think for the most part, her content is good. I really do think that. But that doesn't mean you can't be criticized. So, in the future, when you're going to make criticisms of Shoehead, I really wish there would be a little more substantive that she's an alt-right grifter or she's dumb. There are specific issues at hand here. Big Joel made a great video on the anti-elections and stuff that I am again going to recommend. I even watched it and then posted a video of me watching it on my channel. So if you want to go look at that as well, that might be sort of a worthwhile accompaniment to the stuff that I've said here. My approach towards this issue has always been the same. And if you've watched me for long enough, you know what it is. Okay? If a person is beyond my reach, I watch their content on my screen to debunk it or to criticize it or to make fun of it. Ben Shapiro, Stephen Crowder, whatever. If a person is within my reach, if they're a content creator, I have the potential to actually influence my behavior, which at this point is most YouTubers because I'm a fairly large creator. My goal should be somewhat. It's not just about critiquing their opinions or making fun of them. It's also the more important question: can I move this person in a positive direction? Is it possible for me to use my influence on this platform to move them to a point where they're doing better than they are now? Can I positively influence? I'm sure I've had some impressions. She seems at least somewhat impressionable, though in my opinion, not impressionable. Again, she was all of that being said, the question remains, what can be done to maximize the good here? What can be done to decrease the harm and maximize the good? And the answer to that right now is the same as the answer was 2 years ago, which is to critique her when she makes mistakes and praise her when she doesn't. And that's what I'm always going to do. All the people in my community who are screeching about how I need to denounce her, you really don't belong in this community. That is antithetical to everything that I have done and everything that I have said since the beginning of this channel. You can hate you if you want, and that is completely fine. I will never tell you you cannot do that. But I have been saying this since the beginning of my channel. This denounce, cancel this person. This has never been my approach to anything pertaining to political engagement. It's fundamentally counterproductive, not only in a utilitarian sense, because again, if I do that, she has no left friends anymore, as far as I know. Would probably need to be pulled up to the right, but also from a practical perspective, why? The answer why is this: because of parasocial relationships, which a lot of you have with me. You don't like her, you like me, you want me to denounce her, you're very invested in the aesthetic of moral purity that I would maintain by denouncing her. And, buddy, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be morally pure whether or not I denounce you or not. Okay, you see my channel. You really think that's going to be the line in the sand that's going to make me draw this hard gatekeeping line? Are you joking with me right now? If any of the people who obsess over Shoehead are so strange to me. I get that she does bad stuff, but why hyperfixate on her compared to all the myriad conservatives out there who do infinitely more? Some people seem to act like she's somehow more harmful whereas conservatives, they obsess and they fixate in this constant obsession with gatekeeping people who are within or at least next to the left and that. My friendship with a person or my opinions on a person have nothing to do with sheer utilitarian calculus. You should be engaging them. Okay? It's incredibly stupid. And it does not escape my attention that a lot of the people who are that obsessed are predestined to be as well. Which is funny because the worst thing she went ahead and ever did was legitimize Lauren Southern by continuing to be friends with her after this week. She was a white nationalist. And guess he was like leaving Lauren Southern a couple of years ago. The irony of that does not escape me. So I like the idea that this is any hill to die on here, like very, very strange to me, that side of things. But utilitarian capitalism, okay, that's what the name of the game has always been. Quit freaking out. Oh, yeah. One last thing. Very important. Now we'll talk directly to the show. Oh yeah, I denounced Destiny. Sorry, let me maintain my moral purity. I denounced Destiny. There we go. Wouldn't want that. There we go. Now you all know. One last thing, and I can address you directly for this one, but can I ask a thing of you? Is this possible? Is it possible that I could ask this thing of you, Joe? Can you research a subject, any subject of your choosing? I don't mean reading op-eds about it or Twitter threads. I mean, I want you to find a subject on Wikipedia, just like any political topic. It can be contemporary or current events, and then I want you to run down to the citations at the bottom, and I want you to look through it, and I just want you to take a moment to reflect. Yeah. I just want you to take a moment to reflect on the nuance behind any of the topics that you produce for your engagement. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with presenting complicated topics in a simple way, even if you're joking in a pathetic way. But you have to understand the topics and do it responsibly. For the most part, I agree with a lot of the stuff that you say. I'm pro-Medicare for all, I'm progressive, I'm pro-trans rights, blah, 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 blah. But beyond all of that, I think it's important to just sit with it and reflect on it for a second, because sometimes I worry, take this seriously. You think this seriously, you don't take this seriously. Does that make any sense? I don't know. Maybe I'm being stupid right now. Just a 30-year-old adult. Wait, well, you can use that to sing or do anything. What do you mean? The whole point here is that we're not letting people live their life, okay? We're meddling in their affairs, okay? Like Big Brother, right? We're the nanny state signing over the 27 years.
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Mo again. So today, we're going to talk about the TikTok teens tipping and ticking off Texas while triumphantly trolling them with a little trick. I'm going to tip them. Anyway, if you don't know what I'm talking about, Texas has passed a law that enables a website. And the purpose of the website is to get people to rat out their neighbors if their neighbors engage in a behavior that the state deems as socially undesirable. Yeah, when you say it like that, all of a sudden it doesn't sound like small government conservative at all. It sounds like something even the inhabitants of Airstrip 1 might raise an eyebrow at. I mean, there's no way that all of those people that just moved over from California would ever use a similar platform to go after your rivals, right? People in Texas. There's no way that once this becomes normalized, it will ever impact you. All right. Anyway, so currently, this platform is used to encourage people to rat out their neighbors who have engaged in family planning that the state decided that it didn't like. Almost immediately, the people who run the website were like, we're already getting tips. And then they found out that they're mainly coming from people who have been encouraged by those on TikTok and Reddit to submit tips of their own. Some of them were tipping off the site to the governors in planning. Obviously, that's not true. They're just providing information to overwhelm the system. And that's the interesting part about it. If you look at the advice that's going out from the people that are promoting this, it's really smart. They're like, don't copy and paste. Don't use the same information over and over again. Make sure the locations are real. Don't use slogans that are in favor of choice. Don't. And it gives them all of these tools to make sure that it's going to be really hard to use a computer to filter out the fake tips. One of the things about mass surveillance is that it's mass. One of the easiest ways to defeat it or to render it less than effective is to overwhelm it with information. This is something that state actors, we're talking about intelligence agents, they know this. And then they put this to great use over the years. To me, it's incredibly interesting to see people on TikTok employ the same tactic. You provide so much information, it just overwhelms your opposition. And it makes it really hard for them to conduct whatever it was they were trying to do. I have a feeling this was probably been pretty successful. If it's sustained, this may be something that causes them to rethink how they're doing it. I mean, it's not going to change the legislation, but they are definitely going to have to adapt. It's going to make it more difficult to process any information they obtain through this tip website. It's an interesting little term. Anyway, it's just a thought. Yeah, I did that.
Quando pensei em implementar funis de venda no meu negócio, mesmo depois de ter muitos casos de sucesso na internet, fui realmente surpreendida pelo funil. Eu sabia que o funil de vendas era uma ferramenta poderosa. Eu sabia que tinha que utilizar essa ferramenta no meu negócio, mas por alguma razão estava na minha zona de conforto e fui adiante muito.
Welcome all to the Festival of the News! I'm your master of Newsies, here to celebrate a whopping 117 episodes of joy and laughter and some other emotions that we don't need to talk about right now. That's right, folks. We're doing a fun episode. Big special. Maybe some guests, a smorgasbord of all the news happening in the world, but fun, variety, keeping it light. Let us now dive into Cody K. Johnston's spectacularly newsgastic rodeo of oily news content. Haha! Swashbuckling, explosions, romance, perhaps even a murder mystery? Let us ride the wave of destiny to the islands of discovery. Here is some news.
Panic and pandemonium at Kabul airport today as desperate people pour onto the runway trying to flee the country in what can only be described as a chaotic exodus. Now, people are literally clinging on to U.S. military aircraft as they try to take off. The U.S. is in charge of the airport there.
Right. Sorry. I forgot. Sorry, folks. I should have looked at the actual news first. And maybe there's some other good news down the line, and we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about what's happening in Afghanistan, and then we'll move on to the spectacular newsgastic rodeo of oily news. Can we just get like a bumper to get out of this, please? I'm so sorry, everyone. Okay, so Afghanistan, where to begin? Billions of years ago, after dust from an exploded okay, let's not. All right, so okay. So in December of
1979. Oh my god, this is going to be a really long bummer. Okay, actually, let's go back to February of 1979, when the United States CIA began funding Afghan rebels and turning the country toward the West, sparking the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan for 10 years, well into the 80s, before pulling out and subsequently collapsing. God, this episode sucks already. Then, after the Soviet Union dissolved, the U.S. also pulled out their funding, and the country of Afghanistan plunged into a civil war. And not the cool kind where you f*** up an airport either. And they probably did that too, but not with giant polo runs, is my point. Anyway, during all of this, some of the formerly U.S.-funded Mujahideen fighters and others went on to form the Taliban in 1994. And the not-cool civil war lasted about 2 years and then resulted in the Taliban having control of the country from 1996 onward. And while there are other newsworthy events after that and before and during, I'm just going to skip ahead to, like, I don't know, 2000-ish, maybe 2001, like, specifically September of 2001, when a group of mostly Saudi Arabian terrorists with ties to Al-Qaeda, a group that isn't the Taliban, but also has close ties to the Taliban, carried out an attack on America. They're like, really upset a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Like how they had to delay the release of Training Day because of it. Great film. Ethan Hawke, man. Seems like a pretty good guy. I mean, nobody's perfect, right? Yeah, that cheating thing. Not good. Anyway, 9/11. We're talking about 9/11 and how not a month after that, we began Operation Enduring Freedom, also known as Operation Bomb the Living Shit out of Afghanistan before occupying the country for 20 years.
The United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Ah, yeah, there he is. Remember him? And listen, there's a lot here. About the war, Bush, Osama bin Laden, Iraq, Saddam, and how it seems like a lot of what we did there had nothing to do with 9/11 or terrorism or freedom, and the Taliban actually offered to turn in Osama bin Laden after 9/11, and we refused, and we'll circle back to all that, but you sort of remember, and if not, we'll certainly jog your memory, and maybe you weren't even born or sentient for that, and you're like one of those freaks who's somehow under 20 doesn't even exist. I've only read about them, but for now, let's move ahead to what happened with the Taliban, who after enduring freedom sort of scattered and then regrouped around 2003. We then spent a whole lot of years, lives, and money continuing to fight them in Afghanistan because of freedom and other junk. And whenever it seemed like we could leave, we just didn't. And instead, the war just got bigger. Then a new person became president and said this.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world. The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
Remember that guy dying? Motherfucker wasn't even in Afghanistan. Also back in 2001, the Taliban literally offered to give it to us after 9/11. And Bush refused for reasons. That's weird, but hey, we did it. I guess. And that's about when, for like the 5th time, an American president seemed to be indicating that the war was finally winding down, and that we were going to pull our troops out of Afghanistan. The event was, after all, the thing we were originally there to do, get bin Laden. And then we did it. Not pull out of Afghanistan, mind you. We actually, we didn't do that. And then we continued to not do that for like 10 more years. And then Ethan Hawke started that Purge movie, and then a new guy became president, and the subsequent Purge films got like depressingly relevant because this new president guy pretty terrible. And we certainly won't get into all of that, except to say that this new terrible president, like all the presidents before him, inherited a real pickle of a war and had a lot of ideas about ending that war. But at first was like, oh, let's do more war, because he was pretty stupid. But then later was like, okay, maybe let's do less war, because we were getting 20 years, and everyone was like, hey, why are we still doing this war? And also we were like, hey, where did all these Nazis come from? And also, oh, wow, we're all dying because of a virus. And also, the sun sure feels hotter. And also, we were like, holy shit, did they just try to do a stupid coup? And so we were juggling a lot of stuff, is my point. Also, First Reformed had come out and was sweeping a nation, Remember when we couldn't stop talking about First Reformed? Starring Ethan Hawke? He's great. But, buried within all of that other stuff, there was yet another official promise U.S. to pull out of Afghanistan. And it seemed pretty clear that getting troops out of Afghanistan was complicated and probably disastrous. Like, even the really dumb treason president seemed to understand that. And we'll certainly get into why pulling out would destabilize the country. But the point is that we were super gonna do it this time. We set a date and everything. But then that crazy stuff happened when the dumb president got elected out of office, and we got a slightly better president, but still not like, And while Joe Biden initially did delay Trump's promise, there was sort of also Obama's promise, there was sort of also Bush's promise to leave Afghanistan. He actually did do that thing. After 20 years, Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. Classy stuff, show. Great job. And on July 2nd, 2021, U.S. troops left Bagram Airfield, hub of the war, and handed it over to Afghan security forces. And by handed it over, I actually mean left without telling anyone. And aside from the 650 U.S. troops specifically stationed to protect the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, we were more or less officially out of the country. Meanwhile, since May, the Taliban had launched an offensive and began reclaiming areas. And after killing or wounding nearly 2,400 Afghan civilians, by the end of July, they had about half of the country. By mid-August, they had taken over Bagram Airfield, and by a very familiar imagery, the U.S. evacuated its embassy as the Taliban took full control over the country. So, there you have it. I know that was a very long and unnecessary recap of the last 20-plus years. It might have been tough for you to sit there and have all that time wasted, only to end up back where we started with nothing gained. Really annoying stuff. To have wasted a lot of time and effort, money, and lives that could have been spent on other things. About $2 trillion, 20 years, and the lives of 2,448 U.S. troops, 3,846 contractors, 72 journalists, 51,191 Taliban fighters, 444 aid workers, 1,144 Allied service members, 66,000 Afghan military members, and 47,245 civilians. Great jobs all around, no notes. Way to squander an incalculable amount of human existence on something so flimsy that it fell apart faster than this joke set up. See, because we love to frame it as 20 years of effort gone in just a few weeks, but that's not really what happened, is it? If something falls apart in a few weeks after 20 years, it means we didn't spend those 20 years actually building something stable. We failed continuously and for 2 decades. And now the world is, or at least should be, laughing at us. Absolutely pathetic, America. And to blame one person for that just isn't going to cut it. I mean, sure, some people share more blame than others, but we'll get to all of the blame some other time. Right now, we need to move on, get into other oily news content. It's time for Afghanistan. Who do we blame? Okay, I guess we're going to do that right now after all. Okay, Jesus is and who do we blame for everything that happened in Afghanistan? Well, naturally, when figuring that out, we'll turn to the one group that definitely shares no blame and can freely criticize U.S. policy, the GOP.
So what we have seen is an incredibly poorly executed exit from the theater, and it is endangering the lives. Thousands of Americans remain in Afghanistan. It appears the administration has no reasonable plan to safely allow those Americans to leave. Thousands of Afghans aided and assisted our military presence for decades, and it appears that the administration had little to no plan to help those Afghans exit the country as well. And this is a military failure, a failure in planning, a failure in execution that falls squarely on the president. And sadly, at least so far, it seems the president is trying to blame everyone except himself and his own administration.
Thanks, Ted. Enjoy getting ratioed by lame CNN, you weird lying weirdo. Congratulations on using this historic moment to harass a woman online. Weirdo freak liar. Weirdo Ted is now calling for an investigation into everything that's happened this month. And while that's probably more because of the right's deep sexual lust to have their own gotcha impeachment like the other team did twice with that terrible president that they didn't even like, he's also, I guess, not wrong about needing an investigation. But also, not the type of investigation he probably plans on having, where they lay a 20-year war started by George Bush and a 2002 Congress on Joe Biden. But also, Joe Biden was one of those people in 2002 who voted for this 20-year war, and also he absolutely could have worked toward a smoother transition. But also, so could have Trump or Obama for that matter. And we're going to talk about that at some point. But what's key here is that despite the need for actual accountability and an investigation into exactly what went wrong and the bigger conversation we're about to have and all of that, what we shouldn't do is tolerate the courts of conservative ghouls taking their weird victory lap because Biden f***ed up the withdrawal. A thing.
Então, rapaz, peraí. Oi, estás a ouvir bem?
Olha, ainda se valia ou não?
Claro.
Eu ontem
Sim, olha.
não
Como?
mandaste morada nenhuma. Nem nada.
Ah, ok. Eu vou-te mandar o teu WhatsApp. Aquilo é Casa da Azanha. Eu mando-te o WhatsApp mais
Não,
logo.
mandam por mensagem que eu ontem instalei o WhatsApp, estava sem espaço.
Ah, ok.
Uma coisa, eu vou dar a presentear. Acho que é melhor.
Como preferires. Diz.
Agora, quer saber como é que é o método educatório do Santos? Faz transferência ou quê?
Opa, para mim é absolutamente igual. Como preferires. Talvez a menos prática seja levar no dia, porque depois eu vou estar bêbado. Eu vou estar bêbado.
Não vai nada, o educatório não podes.
Claro que posso, que foi isso.
Claro que não podes. Já vais com uma chave, depois tenho que tirar uma chave, não podes.
Eu pus o meu chave no carro quando começar a beber. Depois das fotos.
Então, mas eu posso levar o envelope ou posso?
Oh, está bem, mas como preferires. Olha, já agora, eu também ia para falar contigo, que é o seguinte. Eu estive a mudar as mesas.
Sim.
E originalmente tu estavas na mesa dos noivos e tal, e padrinhos isso.
Ok.
Só que, entretanto,
Mudaste o padrinho.
não. Não, é só porque a mesa vai. Está montes de malta já na mesa. E a Tatiana percebeu que estava a pôr os putos da madrinha noutra mesa. E o que eu fiz agora, só para simplificar, é tu estás numa mesa com o Emanuel e com o Manel, com o Casa Branca.
Ah, está bem, para mim está perfeito.
Está tudo junto, é malta na estrada. Sim.
Pronto, está bem.
É que senão estavas para estarmos a pôr uma mesa com 12 pessoas, toda a gente lado a lado, achei que era estúpido. E sabia que não te ias importar.
Não te preocupes, está ótimo.
Eu sabia que não te ias importar, mas estou só a explicar.
Está bom. Olha, a Tatiana está bem?
Aqui entre nós, né? Ela esteve a fazer análises, ela tem estado mal. E agora fez mais uns, a ver o que é. Tem a ver com intestinos, aquilo que ela fala na net da endometriose, mas está a fazer vários exames. Talvez já se sabe o que é, mas ainda não está confirmado.
Ela está fisicamente a se aguentar?
Pois, o problema é esse, fisicamente está com dores. Cólicos e tal. Temos descobrido o CBD e ficou melhor. Aquela cena da cannabis. Tem tido uns dias bons, teve uns dias maus, mas a gente começa a perceber também a origem dos dias maus, que é coisas tipo aditivas e coisas. Portanto, em princípio, quando for o casamento, ela vai provavelmente abusar com coisas que não devia, mas já sabe o que é e não é. Por acaso, a gente andou a cortar com o glúten e tudo para ela, e nas refeições os dois, né? E depois, entanto, já vimos que não é o glúten, já vimos que, mas, por exemplo, ela estava a cortar com os açúcares, descobriu que o que lhe fazia mesmo mal eram os adoçantes artificiais. E há uma suspeita agora de que, se for essa doença, explica tudo e mais alguma coisa. Está a esperar os resultados dos exames. Mas, isto esteve mal, mas está a melhorar.
Ótimo. Depois o Rui disse que ela tinha que fazer os exames, porque estava com o cara todo.
Sim.
E por isso é que eu estava a perguntar.
Sim,
Então, a exposição, ficou bem ou não?
Ficou. Era fixe. Era fixe ter mais tempo, mas não sei se sabes do Rocha, né? Que eu...
Sim, também teve um stress, não é?
E eu, portanto, tive menos tempo para montar, porque também estive a ajudar o Rocha a desarrascá-lo.
Depois o Rui.
E ainda vou desarrascá-lo segunda-feira, mas é ótima coisa, porque eu estou a falar contigo, estou ainda a acabar uma tela para a exposição. E tenho que tirar foto e pôr o catálogo a fazer esta semana. E ainda tem que fazer coisas para o casamento. Olha lá, tu tens, então, portanto, para eu te mandar uma imagem, vais curtir milhões, agora só por e-mail.
Opa, não, mandas-me por mensagem, também dá para mandar imagens.
Sim, ok, um SMS, ok.
Ou um e-mail, como quiseres.
Eu mando um e-mail porque são 4 ou 5.
Tá bem.
Tens que ver o fato do cão.
Ok. Está combinadíssimo.
Está combinadíssimo, eu falo com a Tatiana Silva agora, assim que ela voltar, eu peço para ela fazer, juntar as informações todas, estás a ver, em mente, essas coisas todas no fecheiro só, que a gente já falou disso.
Também pode mandar por
Certo, e aviso quando mandar, está bem?
Tá bom, tá, obrigado.
Vá, abraço, gostei também.
Um grande abraço e beijinho a Tatiana.
Abraço, que bem, eu dou.
Majority of Americans wanted, a thing that a lot of these same freaks were gunning for when their guy was the president. And by their guy, I mean sometimes literally their father. Hey, yeah, thanks, Donald Trump Jr. I can't wait to hear your analysis of a war that started back when you were getting your ass kicked at comedy clubs for laughing too hard at racist jokes. A real thing that happened. Also, that same year, he talked about how he liked remaining anonymous and staying in the background. Any update on that?
Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Just watching my algorithms get crushed. I guess I did something to piss off the Instagram gods, so hopefully you're seeing this stuff anyway. We'll do what we can. Talk to you soon.
Donnie Jr. can't shut the up about how much of a mistake it was to pull out of Afghanistan. He loves it almost as much as he loves openly agreeing with the Taliban on issues. This is despite him literally helping his dad campaign on the promise of pulling out troops all the way back in 2020. We could spend the entire episode just listing these obvious liars and grifters acting like they weren't rock hard for pulling troops just a few months ago. The GOP quietly removing any mention of Afghanistan from Trump's presidential accomplishments, etc. Or how these people pretending to be concerned about the safety of the Afghan people and allies are the exact same ones who absolutely can't stand immigration and, in fact, housely voted against speeding up the visa process for Afghan allies we are now leaving behind. Like, here's Barry Moore of Alabama, one of the people who voted against those visas, retweeting a statement by Kevin McCarthy saying, President Biden recklessly pulled out of Afghanistan without a plan, leaving thousands of Americans and those we've made promises to behind, without a single delicious slice of self-awareness. These transparent, hypocritical wieners and whiners. For the love of all that is good, let us collectively ignore them. They don't matter. Like, does anyone really need to see what f***ing Gutfeld has to say about this? Kind of? Yeah, kind of. I get that.
So when asked about this contradiction in treatment, Twitter said their top priority is keeping people safe. Of course, unless it's Afghan women and people who think like Trump. If those words were any more empty, they'd be Hunter Biden's medicine cabinet. And as for keeping us safe, you could have fooled me, Twitter. The last thing someone sees before Chrissy Teigen ruins their lives are their names trending on your vacuous vomit engine. If you still think that these social media titans have your best interests at heart, you probably think Ben and Jerry's is in your heart's best interest too. At least the Taliban doesn't pretend to be neutral.
Oh my god, he's so beautiful. I went to sculpt him with my Dave, you are fired. Gutfeld actually used the Afghanistan news to do like 4 minutes about Twitter censorship grievances. Like, seriously. As the opener of his first show after news broke about the Taliban, he thought, obviously, everyone's going to be talking about Twitter cancel culture. Then the Hunter Biden medicine cabinet thing, like, does he mean that he doesn't have medicine in the cabinet, like he doesn't do drugs? Or is it that he's taking all of the drugs, but, like, why would he keep them in the... Okay, you know what? We can't just talk about this beautiful idiot. Greg, at least the Taliban, Gutfeld. And enough about fake blame aimed at Joe Biden. Let's get to the real blame, starting with Joe Biden, a person who is definitely to blame for at least some of this. Like, yes, there's his history with voting for the war and Senate record being apart, but I'd rather focus on the broad idea that Biden was simply continuing something Trump began, as explained by this footage of a very sleepy comrade.
I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021. just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. The Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1.
So firstly, the coat rack is not wrong, in the sense that it was important to get the heck out of Afghanistan. And while that's not an easy task, there's this narrative going that there simply was no other way to leave the country without causing the level of chaos we saw. As if we had our finger in a dam, and pulling it out was the only option. But that's not entirely the case, is it? And you can see that, not just by looking at how quickly the Taliban took control after we left, but the fact that they did it without much resistance at all. So why was that? Well, you're going to see a lot of people trying to say that the Afghan army were a bunch of dildo brains who, despite our great American training, simply f***ed the dog on a combat level. Except the problem wasn't ineptitude so much as widespread corruption in the highest rankings of the military. Food and ammunition supplies meant for the front lines were mysteriously vanishing. Money being embezzled, drama was faked, soldiers not getting paid, and quickly losing trust in the Afghan government. Instead of addressing this, the U.S. largely just ignored it, while supplementing the problem with thousands of private contractors. Contractors who, back in June, began to leave the country. Oh good, glad they're safe. Meanwhile, the Taliban began pushing forward, and by June, it captured 81 of the 420 district centers. By July, that number rose to 127 and then beyond, showing a clear and obvious speed to their takeover. During this time, a report came out by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Construction, a watchdog group specifically looking at spending in the country. It said, and I'm quoting, the ANDSF, as in Afghan National Security Forces, has retaken some districts, and the Afghan government still controls all 34 provincial capitals, including Kabul. But from public reporting, the ANDSF appears surprised and unready, and is now on its back foot. It also expressed, quote, serious concerns about the corrosive effects of corruption within the ANDSF, and went on to call out a pervasiveness of over-optimism and a tendency to elevate anecdotes of good news over data showing a lack of progress. This report came out in July, the same month that Biden assured us that the pullout would go smoothly. The same month we knew that many Afghan interpreters were still struggling to get visas to leave the country. Several months after, that same Afghanistan Reconstruction watchdog group flat out said the aid cuts we were seeing would likely cause the Afghanistan government to collapse and return to the same Taliban control in the 1990s. This is a report from March, folks, a group we tasked specifically for assessing this stuff, saying that unless we give more aid, the Afghan government would collapse in our absence. But to be fair, how would we pay for it? Then, in August, we pulled out troops from Afghanistan. And then, as predicted, the Afghan army that was literally living off of boxes of old potatoes began to lay down their arms as the Taliban rolled in. Because of course they did. They were literally beginning to starve and had no reason to fight. The idea that they just rolled over to the Taliban ignores not only all the Afghan soldiers who gave their lives fighting, but just how neglected they were in these final months. And then we get defense officials going on television and saying shit like this.
There was nothing that I or anyone else saw that indicated a collapse of this army and this government in 11 days.
So yes, we can absolutely blame Biden and our military for not taking the proper steps to ensure that it wouldn't go so bad so fast, or rather, knowing and not caring. Because the first part of that clip I just showed is this.
I have previously said from this podium and in sworn testimony before Congress that the intelligence clearly indicated that multiple scenarios were possible. One of those was an outright Taliban takeover following a rapid collapse of the Afghan security forces and the government. Another was a civil war, and a third was a negotiated settlement. However, the time frame of rapid collapse that was widely estimated and ranged from weeks to months and even years.
Oh, okay. So you knew this was going to happen. You just didn't think it would happen so fast. Thanks for clearing that up, you highly decorated turd. But hey, at least it gets even worse. You see, that group I keep mentioning, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, they make a lot of cameos in news articles for the last decade. This is because they've been giving quarterly reports to Congress specifically about our progress in Afghanistan since around 2012. And in short, those reports have been filled with elaborate tales of failure and waste. A $280 million project to help 75,000 Afghan women get jobs, resulting in the promotion of 55 women total. This was from 2018. The same year, they put out a report saying that the $3 billion we had put into a trust for the reconstruction of Afghanistan had no oversight and was at high risk of misuse. Here's a report from 2013 saying the same thing about public health programs in Afghanistan. Here's a letter from 2014 detailing substandard construction techniques being used by contractors, resulting in a serious fire hazard. A $34 million facility that was built and then never occupied. Like, they built it and then it just sat there, empty. Here's a fucking Ponzi scheme they uncovered. And they were doing this right up until now. Here they are in 2020, warning about hundreds of millions of dollars in missing weapons. But hey, good news, we found them, and by we I mean the Taliban. The point here is, holy shit, for the last decade, we have been thoroughly documenting a timeline of absolute failure in our efforts to rebuild this nation. And Congress and the presidents have had total access to this documentation. And we just kept going without making any adjustments, despite, and I really can't stress this enough, knowing that we were failing. And then we just left. So yeah, there's just so much blame to go around, and it feels like the entire government should get confronted like the villain in a political thriller. Just like thousands of suited congresspeople, all cornered and disgraced like Alan Alda in Murder in 1600. Spoilers for Murder in 1600. But also, this fucking chump used his presidency to drastically cut visas for Afghan interpreters because he doesn't like the brown folks. So yeah, some people are worse than others, I guess. Oh gosh, I do wonder what he has to say about all this.
I thought it would maybe run through bureaucracy. It doesn't. You need somebody up there that they're going to respect. So when they say, oh, he talked to the Taliban, you remember they were criticizing me. They criticized me when I talked to Kim Jong-un. Well, President Biden told me it's the single biggest problem we have. I said, have you ever called him? Have you ever talked to him? No, I haven't. He did try, but it was not receptive on the other side. But it was receptive with me. Now, we were supposed to have a war and probably a very big nuclear war. I get along with him great, and I got along with him great. He doesn't like Biden much, I'll tell you that. But I got along with him great.
Okay, so gibberish. Makes sense there would be a weird string of gibberish. Anything else, former Mr. Loser President?
I've heard as many as 40,000 Americans, and the Taliban, good fighters. I will tell you, they're good fighters. We have to give them credit for that. They've been fighting for 1,000 years. That's what they do, is they fight.
Don't we miss him? Bye. So yeah, Biden's certainly done f***ed up, and boy, I don't like the guy, but I suppose at least he's not this wrong, weird fucking freak who thinks the Taliban has been around for 1,000 years. I guess this is the bar we've set for ourselves. But just because the last guy was cartoonishly bad, and definitely would have handled this way worse, we can't act like Biden doesn't also share blame with Trump, or Obama, or I feel like there's someone else who's involved in all of this, like some kind of like a president who also could be blamed for what's happening. I'm sure it'll come. Probably right after the episode's done, right? I'll be like, Tony, you've done it again. Anyway, Afghanistan segment's over. You said all that needs to be done and said, and so let's move on. But first, enjoy these commercial messages. Oh, wow. I sure am tired from all the news. That's why some days I just want to kick back and watch videos of raccoons and little outfits on the internet. Sometimes I donate to the raccoons so they can buy fancier outfits, which requires sharing my personal information. The point here is that the internet is weird, man, but we love it. And we very often share much of our personal information over it. We cast it out, our precious deets, the way one would carelessly toss a postcard into a mail slot. And yet we rarely think about the many grubby ends that touch our poor, defenseless deets. Well, worry no longer, my little watchers, because ExpressVPN is here to provide you with the much needed protection for all the grub-fingered cretins looking to steal your information. It's the envelope over the postcard, or rather, the little raincoat on the raccoon. Or, more specifically, it's a virtual private network you can use to protect the connection between your device and the World Wide Web. You see, we've actually teamed up with the folks at ExpressVPN, and so if you go to expressvpn.com/somenews, you can find out how to get 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. We're confident that after trying out ExpressVPN's premium high-speed servers and 24/7 customer support, you'll be hooked like a fish on the end of a fishing pole held by a little raccoon in a fisherman's outfit. Their app is easy to use, very secure, and in fact, they have been rated the #1 VPN provider by TechRadar, CNET, and The Verge. Listen, I don't know if you know this, but browsing on incognito mode isn't exactly incognito. Oh no. Oh no. Later. ISPs can legally sell your data, not to mention all the other corporations mining your data without your knowledge. Also, the man. Don't forget the man. And so ExpressVPN can actually put a stop to that by encrypting all of your data and rerouting it to their secure server. You get your data encryption, your IP masking, stuff you really do need when connected to an open network at any coffee shop or a hotel, places where even the most beginner hackers can access your information with just a little computer knowledge. It's good to protect your deets. You love your deets, but your deets aren't for everyone. Your deets shouldn't be some open dumpster that people can just rummage through like as some kind of like a trash-loving giraffe. So go to expressvpn.com/somenews and see about protecting your deets for 3 months free. Communication spectacular newscasting rodeo boiling news content returns now. I wish we didn't have that graphic anymore. Anyway, welcome back to the special. We just finished talking about Afghanistan and are ready to move on. No more of that. So let's spin the magical wheel of news and see what comes up. Oh. Like the wheel is spoken. Fun. But hey, good news. It just so happens that I finally remembered the other guy that did believe for all of this. Lauren Michaels. Holy shit, early 2000s SNL. For reference, Kandahar is one of the big cities we bombed during Operation Enduring Freedom. No doubt killing a lot of people. And yes, I'm going to talk about George W. Bush, the guy who did this stuff, but I wanted to give some of our younger viewers an insight into why he was allowed so easily to do all this stuff in the first place. Because all of us, or at least most of us, were in a very unique and toxic headspace. Something terrible had happened to a lot of American citizens in 2001. And that terrible thing briefly united the country, but also shaped a generation of cynicism and fear for a lot of young people. And for the older people, well, they just lost their minds. It really screwed us up to the point that some of the most independent-minded or liberal voices were shouting, "Love it or leave it" sentiments, lest they be booed off the stage. We with the time where we have a man sending us to war for fictitious reasons, whether it's the petition of duct tape or the fictitious of orange alerts. We are against this war, Mr. Bush. Shame on you, Mr. Bush. Shame on you. And anytime you've got the say what you will about Michael Moore. And now that you've done that, I gotta say, boy, it sure was surreal to see a war-hungry Hollywood. They re-edited the Bourne Identity to make the CIA, the villain of the film, seem more good. That's how fucked up we were from 9/11. And to be clear, I'm not saying that we were all to blame. Anyone who says that. Sorry about before, Lauren. Let's do lunch. Let's f*** lunch together. I just wanted to paint a picture of how incredibly out of sorts we were. How overwhelmed with anger and fear. It's why, when Osama bin Laden was finally killed, this happened. This was across the country, and
He
while
killed
it
an old man.
represents
He killed
fear
an old man.
that people who were barely teenage when 9/11 happened uproariously celebrate a man getting shot in the face after so many other deaths, it makes a lot of sense when you realize that the September 11th attacks were likely what shaped their adult view of the world. They had, for as long as they can remember, been told that there was a specific monster out there that was now dead. During a time where we were all deeply afraid and paranoid, of course we were sold something literally called a war on terror. The media bought it, Hollywood TV bought it, and so with a 90% approval rating, having refused an offer by the Taliban to turn in Osama bin Laden, have I mentioned that yet? Because he did that, George W. Bush and a unanimous vote in Senate led us into a 20-year war. Not to mention a nearly unanimous House of Representatives, with the only single nay vote known to Representative Barbara Lee, who, and this is real life, received thousands upon thousands of death threats for doing so, plus multiple op-eds calling her a traitor.
Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us would say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control.
Hey, look at the totally correct person. Let's get her. So, yeah, everyone wanted a lick of that sweet stick of war. They wanted it all over their faces and their mouths. We could put the war wherever we wanted it. They wanted it so hard. And an argument can be made that really any president at this point would have done the thing Bush did. Going to war, that is. It was a very popular move. What you can't say any president would do, however, is all the stuff that came after this moment. And perhaps the reason that 90% approval rating took a steady 7-year decline.
These alternative methods you talked about in terms of extracting information from these suspected terrorists, were you made personally aware of all of the techniques that were used, for example, against the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and did you approve all of those techniques? I told our people get information without torture and was assured by our Justice Department that we were not torturing.
Good question from Matt Lauer. Jesus Christ, what a time the mid-2000s were. Specifically, that's from September of 2006. And thanks to a handful of leaked documents and books and all sorts of, evidence, since then, we finally have a pretty darn good idea of what went down behind the scenes. And then starting in 2002, Attorney General John Ashcroft verbally approved a series of enhanced interrogation techniques, such as slapping, cramped confinement, sleep deprivation, diapers, waterboarding, and sex. Torture. And the following month, the CIA considered filling in the president to the torture, to which the White House decided it would be better if Bush simply didn't know about the torture. And so for the next 4 fucking years, our president gave the CIA a blank check under the single stipulation that what they did was technically legal. The torture.
Well, I thought I went a little more than because the lawyer said it was legal. Said did not fall within the anti-torture act.
So great to see both of these dudes back together. Obviously, we're just gonna scratch the surface when talking about the Bush era of war and all the torture, but the crux appeared to be a president that was willfully ignorant while a cluster of GOP fools did pretty much whatever they wanted under him. And while those fools were way more insidious in their actions, your Cheneys, your dead Rumsfelds, the blood flows to Bush's hands. Bush, who, and I don't know if you know this, rejected an offer from the Taliban to turn over Osama bin Laden.
If they want to stop our military operations, they just got to be contradicted. When I said no negotiation, I meant no negotiation.
Yes! No negotiations. Just turn him over, but also we don't want him if you negotiate for it. And for context, the thing that the Taliban was asking for at the time was for us to stop bombing them. We were bombing them to get Osama bin Laden, but refused their offer to hand him over if we stopped bombing them. So yeah, maybe Bush should go to jail or something? I don't know. Seems weird that he just moved on from this without going to jail or something. Seems super weird that anyone over a certain age could act like this all falls on Biden or even Trump or Obama when this guy did so much deliberate damage while in charge. Like, really fucking disingenuous for the GOP to point all of their fingers at Joe Biden. Really messed up stuff. Also, maybe all presidents should be the president, but when you're done, prison. But the big question, at least for this episode, is wow, why did we continue to stay for so long after bin Laden was killed through 4 different presidents? And the answer is something called mission creep. It's a great descriptor for what Solid Snake does and is, and also describes when a country plunged into war begins to move the goalposts of what constitutes a victory. And it's what we've been doing for the last 20 years. It's something we've all been thinking about, but perfectly is summed up in a 2014 extensive study by it's the Office of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction again, who interviewed over 600 officials involved in the war and found that no one was quite sure what we were doing. To quote one anonymous person, it was never fully clear in our minds what the established goals and timelines were. Man, remember the Afghanistan papers that everyone ignored? Seems like we should have given those a bit of a scan. After all, this all started because of 9/11, getting Osama bin Laden, punching terror in the movement, etc. And then it was Laura Bush who spoke up about the Taliban's treatment of women and our need to help the people of Afghanistan. And she wasn't wrong, at least not about the Taliban, and to help. And it really should be noted that many people in Afghanistan did have their lives improved by intervention, and there's a solid argument for humanitarian involvement. And there's a solid counter-argument that it'll still involve exploitation and filling imperialist pockets. And also, what we're just gonna stick our noses in and make a list of all the places we gotta go. We do that, we gotta do that, we gotta do that. Also, here is a fresh WikiLeaks release about a CIA analysis from March 2010 that proposes using Afghan women to create a PR feminist campaign to aid in justifying their attacks on the Taliban and continuation of the war. Pretty gross, guys. I know you're watching this, and that's pretty gross of you. But regardless, what these and other similar sentiments mostly equated to at the time was extending the military effort into the general policing and exploding of Afghanistan. A vague war on terror with no specific purpose and therefore no ending. Policing opium for some reason, which ultimately never broadly helped the Afghan population, as evidenced by, right now. The people it did help the most, however, were anyone who wanted an extended and unwinnable war. People like James Woolsey, a former CIA boss and longtime presidential advisor, who on September 12th of 2001 began to accuse Iraq of being responsible for the World Trade Center attack. A day after the attacks. I don't know, maybe he just had a really good hunch, or maybe he was the director of the private equity firm Paladin Capital, which immediately began investing in companies creating products designed for anti-terrorism security. I don't know, who can say? And there's hundreds of these guys, right? Thousands perhaps, and when one dies, 2 more show up. And this is where I note that in just the year 2020, the world spent $2 trillion in various military funding, $778 billion of which from the United States. It is a booming industry all over the world, which happens to be the place where the United States currently has roughly 800 bases in 70 different countries. Of course, we stayed in Iraq and Afghanistan, because had we not, we would have just occupied a different place, done a war elsewhere. We can't not do the war. So let's stick with the endless war we already have, It's called the military-industrial complex. I don't know, Google it or whatever. And this relation between our military interests and the people making billions from it is one that self-perpetuates. Hey, remember military drones? That's a market predicted to make $26 billion by 2028. And boy, did Obama love drones. And drones loved Obama. It's a relationship you could describe as symbiotic. As if one person was scratching your back by helping you win a re-election by holding off layoffs in a swing state, and in return, you also scratch theirs by authorizing international sales of your product, and then becoming the president to sell more weapons than any other before since World War II. Good for him! Obama's drone lust got so intense that by 2016, they filled more airspace over Afghanistan than conventional planes. Because you see, the beauty of drones is that the operators are safely elsewhere. There are no American casualties when you're bombing suspicious weddings for miles in the sky like a jiggy Greek god. And so drones created yet another way to extend this war by limiting the number of Americans affected. Or as this one expert explains,
well, we don't have troops in the map, not really gaining intelligence. you're not really there. And when you're not there, you can't really win a war when you're not there. You can just create the possibility for a little Orwellian perpetual war. You know, what usually ends wars is body bags come home where the cost gets too high. Or the jokes. Body bags don't come home, and the costs are relatively cheap.
Thanks, buddy. Other things that make Mission Creek far easier: mercenaries. Much like drones, mercenaries enable the military to skew the number of troops on the ground, so politicians can justify a continuing war. We can look at stuff like the time Blackwater Guards killed 17 civilians and think, well, that isn't us, despite the fact that we had already paid them over $1 billion in contracts at that point. We liked it better this way. We, being American politicians, who could use contractors as a way to hide the actual cost of what we were doing. We, also being Eric Prince. Oh, hey, Eric, what have you been up to these days?
It's the same collection of national security elites in Washington that have failed for that entire 20 years. They took what was a brilliant victory by special operations of the CIA in the first 6 months after 9/11 and turned it into a massive failed nation-building exercise. And it's largely been like a Star Trek cosplay convention where they just sit and talk to each other and delude themselves into thinking they're making progress. And it's been the same nonsense, and they've refused to think about any other ways to solve this problem.
Yeah, you stick it to those national security elites, billionaire defense contractor Eric Prince, on Swanson Air and CIA hopeful Tucker Carlson's show, because, of course. Hey, Eric, how's your sister, Betsy DeVos? Cool of Trump Department of former employees who did that murder those years back. Is my soul bleeding? It feels like my entire soul is bleeding. I need to stuff a tampon all up in my soul. I could probably do a whole video on military contractors and forever wars and Ethan Hawke's drone movie and Mission Creek. But circling all the way back to Biden and the idea there was no way to leave Afghanistan without causing widespread chaos, well, this is why that is being played. Because the United States has become so conditioned by our military occupation that we don't see anything between that and our total absence. We spent 20 entire years half-actively perpetuating an aimless war for the purposes of maintaining an economy of contractors and weapon manufacturers, and billions dissolved into well-documented nation-building failures, creating an unstable and bitter society while the Taliban quietly waited on the sidelines. Our efforts to actually improve the lives of their citizens were minimal. As this, you guessed it, cigar report outlines, our 20 years there only managed to boost literacy by 30% and bring down child mortality rates. And that's good, for sure. But as the report goes on to say, the amount of money and time we put into it, it's pretty fucking grim. And at no point did the United States attempt to understand Afghan culture or economy, because it's actually about our culture and economy, making nearly all of our nation-building projects unsustainable. And we knew this. And so maybe it was never about actually helping, and that's why, when we left, everything fell apart. Because just like we always know that torture doesn't actually get results, we surely knew that we don't send in the military to make a country more stable. But we do both, because the right people make money, and our culture simply loves to justify aggression over diplomacy. Good guys with guns, Liam Neeson getting his revenge, and so on. So the idea that there were no good options in Afghanistan is horse. A big horse's there were good options. They would just involve completely thinking what we were doing over there. They would mean admitting that we were wrong and insidious for 20 years, and then we started from scratch. We're not going to do that, because that would not only mean admitting we're wrong in Afghanistan, but wrong in so many other times we've involved ourselves in other countries. And boy, do we love involving ourselves in other countries. So who is to blame? Bush, Biden, Trump, Obama, Congress, America? Yes. It's actually a lot easier to identify who isn't to blame for what happened. So let's do that right now! Afghanistan, who isn't to blame? Number 1, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Number 2, Barbara Lee. And that's it. Afghanistan, who isn't to blame? Oh, and Ethan Hawke, probably. Why couldn't this video be about Ethan Hawke? Okay, we're almost done, I swear. So maybe can we spin that news wheel one last time? But like, add some more variety. there's still a lot to talk about with Afghanistan. God! Listen, Ethan Hawke is great. He's gonna be in the Knives Out sequel, you know? And he feels underrated, right? Like, he's been quietly doing great work for decades now. Often stuff that sneaks up on you. The Good Lord Bird? Come on, man. That's awesome stuff. Flawless man. No notes.
We have a president who likes drawing. Yet, it's incredibly useful for getting the troops out of Afghanistan.
That's a shame. So anyway, Afghanistan. It seems like there's not much more we need to say, except there is tons more to say. Because I want to talk about what's about to happen. The inevitable response from the U.S. and our destiny to not learn a single thing or take any responsibility for what we did. And it's already happened.
So we're getting it. And if history is any guide, and it's always a guide, we will see many refugees from Afghanistan resettled in our country, coming much probably in your neighborhood. And over the next decade, that number may swell to the millions. So first we invade, and then we're invaded. It is always the same.
You know, Smudge Tarleton, you're right. It is always the same, isn't it? And so, after f***ing up Afghanistan, we're about to see an entire drawn-out and frustrating debate about whether or not we should accept their refugees into our country. Like a shitty friend who offers to fix your car, accidentally lights it on fire due to negligence and greed, and then refuses to give you a ride to work. A large portion of America is looking to take the extreme scumbag route, and it's extremely important that we don't let them. Because in all this talk about Bush and Biden and blame, it's easy to forget that this is all about real people. People whose lives we've been fucking with for far too long, who we can easily dismiss because we don't have to see them every day. We don't have to think about the suffering and pain and hardships, about how much these people have been fighting for their lives. We don't think about it because this war has been going on for so long that many of them and us were born into it. And it's good that we can end it, but the way we did it, not so much. And now a lot of people want help. So here's a bunch of links on the screen that will put below the video. These are groups for helping the women of Afghanistan, the refugees, and journalists. Please take a look at them. Maybe add more links in the comments. Tell us our suggestions are shit if they're shit. And if you can, donate to them. I'm sure they like that very much. Call your local politicians and tell them that you support your state accepting Afghan refugees. Hold America accountable for cleaning up the ridiculous mess it caused. The evacuation is happening as we speak. As of recording this, the U.S. has got 48,000 people out. Something they maybe should have done first, but I guess it's something. It's good we got those people out. It's good that news organizations are working to pull their people. It's fucking great that the Afghan Girls Robotics team got out. It's good that Airbnb is promising to house refugees, and we should probably keep checking up on them about that and make sure they do that. But yes, good things. Good to see people actually getting them. But for the sake of all that is we need to do everything we can to not get roped into another forever war, or even just war. Be it because of another terrorist attack, or fake humanitarian reasons, or some other bullshit reason. We need to learn a lesson from this that our leaders surely will not. And so when it comes time for another big patriotic vote, we need to let them know that we're sick and tired of this. And trust me, there will be another one. Possibly even in the same goddamn country as before.
Amid all the evacuations from Afghanistan, one country is holding up. China is urging its citizens to remain indoors in Afghanistan, but it is keeping its Kabul embassy open. Yesterday, the country's foreign ministry said China is ready for, quote, friendly and cooperative relations with the Taliban.
And so, as America moves on, the world talks about China going. After all, the Taliban is now in charge of one of the world's largest deposits of lithium, a material we need to make electric cars go, amongst other things. It is, ironically, like oil to us. And once again, we're seeing a big American rival move into Afghanistan instead of us. And do you recall what we did the last time that happened? Anyone?
When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan. And we were successful. The Soviets left Afghanistan, and then we said, great, goodbye, leaving these trained people who were fanatical in Afghanistan and Pakistan, leaving them well armed, creating a mess, frankly, that at the time we didn't really recognize. We was so happy to see the Soviet Union fall, and we thought, okay, fine, we're okay now. Everything's going to be so much better.
Thanks, Hillary. Weird that it's you saying it, but yeah, you're not incorrect. It is disheartening, to say the least, to realize we're literally in the same exact position we were back in the 70s. Because once again, we gotta beat the commies, right? We gotta get the thing that makes cars go. We gotta be on top, even if it means completely destabilizing the Middle East, accidentally creating a new terrorist faction, and plunging ourselves into another 20-year war with no clear goal. Also, hey, remember all those drones? Did you think the drones pulled out of Afghanistan? Because they didn't. And in fact, as a response to this, the United States is stationing a bunch of MQ-9 Reaper drones in the Persian Gulf for both the Pentagon and the CIA to use for, redacted. Boy, it's almost as if we ended the war only for us. It's almost like, along with destabilizing the area, giving the Taliban a bunch of weapons and control, we didn't even do the thing where we actually left Afghanistan and are already talking about the need to keep a close grip on the area. It's almost like we're locked into some inescapable time loop. Like the movie Predestination, starring Ethan Hawke, military drone enthusiast. God, I'm depressed. Sorry, everyone. This was supposed to be a fun one. Anyway, this has been Cody K. Johnston's Spectacular Newsgasmic Rodeo of Boiling News Content. Have a great 9/11 anniversary, folks. 20. War in Afghanistan can almost drink legally, and we can already smoke legally. Speech smoking. Hey everybody, I'm a goofy character from the news show. Thanks for watching. It's been a great time, right? We had a great time today talking about all that good stuff. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and leave it in a comment. And we've got a Patreon.com for some more news. We've got a podcast where we do more news. You can listen to that on podcast places. And merch, if you like more merch, or this guy. I'm gonna come back and the cliffhanger on the news Babadook or whatever. I don't know. Thanks. Alrighty, let's talk about Matt Walsh. Or let's talk about cartoons. I mean, Matt Walsh is a cartoon, but let's talk about Matt Walsh talking about cartoons. Considering I am currently a cartoon, part of the office, it's a cartoon talking about a cartoon man talking about cartoons. Hopefully that's not too confusing for everybody, because now we're going to get into a different type of cartoon. Fan art. So this is actually a piece done by Z. They are a fan channel and also he is a friend of mine. So there's that. And it was actually very weird. During Dragon Con 5 years ago, in Atlanta, that's what it was. Just hearing randomly, "Hey, Cirrus," from a crowd was really fucking weird. So thank you for one of those weird experiences. The second one is also from them. They put together a 3D model that I never even have this. There's apps for it. But it was done with fun. So it's kind of neat. It was an interpretation of the Cirrus model via that particular app. But anyways, thank you very much for the fan exhibition. As always, everyone, thank you very much for dropping fan exhibition. As you do, your fan will be featured on the video. The best way to serve people from the fan section of the Discord. And with that said, let's talk about this man. How you doing, Matt? Matt Blue. Well, back in my day growing up in the
interesting thing about kid shows is they were shows for kids. That's what they were for. And some of them were better. Some were kind of stupid. Some were artistic masterpieces. Like, for example, an Nickelodeon show, Salute Your Shorts, which is a 90s show that every 90s kid remembers, and it's shocking to discover that every other 90s kid remembers it too.
What the fuck was Salute Your Shorts? I'm sorry, man, I've never heard of that show. Also, I like how some of the shows you showed there, things like Rock and Farm of Life, most of that show is much more easily understood by an adult. It is also a show where most of the stuff is more easily understood by an adult. You know, back in your day, you also had Animaniacs, one of the most overtly political shows and kids of all fucking time. Like, okay, this idea. Back in my day, we used to have kids shows for kids. Now let's not talk about the actual, political themes shown in those various shows. We had kids shows for kids. We don't talk about issues like climate change and political problems in our shows. Despite the 80s having Captain Planet, we didn't talk about things like, modern day terror. Okay, well, there's G.I. Joe, but for every issue that you bring up, we didn't have a show that celebrated homosexuality. Says the fan of He-Man. No matter what show or what political issue you bring up, there's probably going to be some kids show that talk about it in some way. If we're talking about the 90s, right? 90s and the early 2000s, we're talking about, let's think about a kids show I do real quick, that tackled a lot of political issues. You might not be aware about it, but Static Shock. It's that Planet was 90s, pretty sure that Planet was 80s. We just all watched it in the 90s, but we didn't have to watch it for a while. But pretty certain that if you ever watched a show like Static Shock, that show had a lot of political messaging in it. There were several points where, like, I remember one episode that always stuck out to me as a kid, was when Static is actually, like, relating to Green Lantern, because the Green Lantern of that era was John Stewart. They were both black, and he was pointing out that, like, he was getting out of a job with clothes on his back, but, like, the community he was in was something that he wanted to keep on fighting for regardless. And there was a bunch of underlying, like, political issues in that show that got talked about. There are several issues that did very overtly talk about racism and how immigrants get benefits. But, there's also more subtle subliminal stuff in it. But, I get it now, Walsh. Back in your day, shows didn't do any of these political propaganda, agendas, or anything else. Okay, so Captain Planet was 1992, 96. Okay, cool. So I guess it's just fucking wrong.
Now, the thing about these shows is that their primary goal was to entertain, as I remember. That's different from the situation that we have today, where kids shows seem to consider entertainment sort of a secondary concern. The primary goal now is to ensure that children in the audience adopt the correct political and ideological viewpoints.
Okay. So, you're going to show up Animaniacs. Again, one of the most overtly political shows of all time. Also, can I just say that old shows did a lot of, like, having a message at the end of them? If you don't think that was trying to push people towards a particular, moral ideology, I don't know what is. Like, do you remember how when Sailor Moon got dubbed over here, how they had to put in those kind of messages in Sailor Moon? Like, the ends of episodes just randomly had these PSAs for kids that were very much like the Sonic Says segments at the end of Sonic the Hedgehog. Does anybody else remember that? And how weird and jarring that was? But that was done because that was kind of the normal time. You want to bitch about, the shows were just meant to entertain. They didn't have any of this messaging for kids. It wasn't trying to push kids into a particular ideology. No, it did. Those shows did. They really, really did.
Be a morality character. That was the lesson that we should learn.
And by correct, I mean those things that are in keeping with the mainstream beliefs of our culture, and by that I mean incorrect. So by correct, I mean incorrect.
Okay, cool. So what incorrect beliefs being pushed by these TV shows?
greatest example, and maybe the worst. This one is fresh out of the indoctrination oven. It's the show London Babies, in which Gonzo comes out as a gender-fluid cross-dresser. Yes, really.
Gonzo has always been lacking of a gender. Gonzo is Gonzo. There were a lot of people very ready to educate me on exactly how non-binary Gonzo had been in previous iterations of puppets. And again, Gonzo had cross-dressed in previous iterations of puppets all from behind. But okay, this is definitely a recent phenomenon, man. This is such a recent phenomenon.
Let's watch.
Here you are. You missed our royal ball. We met the most amazing princess. But they ran away, and all they left behind was this. Everyone, there's something I need to tell you. The princess who came to your ball tonight was me. I'm Gonzarella.
Okay.
Gonzo, why did
That's gonna get me into a copyright strike. So we're done watching London Babies thing again. I don't want to get into a copyright strike.
Gonzo doesn't have a father in the home to say, hey, take that thing off. Let's see. Get that thing off.
So wait a minute. Gonzo doesn't have a dad to tell him to take the dress off. Allow me to show an example of a proper fatherly figure telling you what to do. Allow me to introduce you to Snoke, proprietor of the first worker in Star Wars, who was so abusive and tyrannical that at the very first opportunity he was cut down by his protege. Ah, yes, wonderful fatherly example. There, Matt, your editor did a bang-up job there.
You know, some people will point out that kid shows in the past have had episodes where boys dress as girls, and that's true.
Yeah.
But in the past, whether it was a kid show or something for older kids or older audiences, something like Mrs. Doubtfire, a movie from the 90s, probably, in the past, this plot point was always played for laughs, right?
Yes, because the joke was that, oh no, men aren't supposed to wear dresses. And people are largely starting to not find that as funny. Just like at one point, a woman being a business person was a joke played for laughs. At one point, a black person having an education was a joke played for laughs. Despite the fact that the black person would have been played by a white person wearing blackface makeup. I digress. The point of the matter is, people are starting to understand that maybe when we poke fun at people who are wearing dresses because no guys aren't supposed to wear dresses, there's a little bit of transphobia there, potentially. Not all the time. Sometimes you could legitimately say, no, you look particularly ridiculous in that dress. There might be a different dress you could rock, but not this one. That's a different conversation. That's not really the point here. Yes, these things were played for laughs more in the past, but the question is, should we be laughing at them when we need to?
Right? It was supposed to be fun. The point was that boys look stupid in girls' clothes.
Sometimes. I'm just going to throw this out there right now. There are some fucking rocket feminists. And I'm straight shit.
And we should laugh about it.
Oh yeah! Well, we know what I think.
Who cares if you think you're a girl now?
Now,
Yeah. That's a great play there. You are aware that Cosmo was the idiot in that show, right? Is that the point? Or not?
the point was that wearing girls' clothes is great and encourages more boys to try. You know, if you praise your kids correctly, and they can
Wait. Hold on. Wait, Matt, wait. Was the problem that they're being indoctrinated into the correct way and trying to force it correctly on them in any way, shape, or
Sim,
form? That's the issue. Wait,
então deixa-me pausar o vídeo.
That's a problem. But here,
Deixa-me pausar o vídeo.
wait, if you're raising them the correct way, they would